here, but throughout the world. Hear also the cries of your young children and bring to us the restoration in body and the relationships that is needed now and in our time of need. We lift before you all the citizens of the state, from the newborn to the aged. Hold all of us in your mighty hands, especially be with all who are at high risk in regards to the winter illnesses that we see today. Provide for them the guidance and resources that are needed in their time of need. We lift before you, Father, all who serve in the areas of medicine, public health, patients' care, our farmers, our ranchers, our first responders, our highway personnel, and our linesmen. Guard and guide all who serve in these vocations as they seek to provide the care, guidance that is needed in this critical time and safety. Keep them strong and help us to be instruments in providing the resources that they need. Now, as we prepare for this day, work of the unicameral, we humbly ask that you would lead and guide us as elected leaders of this state and grant us the wisdom that needs to care for the citizens entrusted to our care. Bless our governor and his staff with that same wisdom, and bless all of us with the gift of unity and peace as we serve together. We pray the same for all who serve our nation at the federal level and for all government leaders around the world. We also, Lord, pray for peace throughout the world. Gracious God, in and through all of this, remind us again that you so loved all people and that you sent your Son as the Savior of the world. All this we ask in his name, in the name of Jesus. Amen.
I recognize Senator Dover for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you. I call to order the 10th day of the 108th Legislature, second session. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. Mr. Clerk, please record.
There is a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Are there any corrections for the journal?
No corrections this morning.
Thank you. Are there any messages, reports, or announcements?
Not at this time, Mr. President.
Senator Albright would like to recognize Dr. Dave Holtina of Pender, who is serving as the physician of the day. Mr. Clerk will now proceed to the first item on the agenda.
Mr. President, Senator Brewer would move to withdraw LB 973.
Senator Brewer, you're recognized to open on your motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. LB 973 actually would have replicated what is already in law, so we're asking to withdraw 973. Thank you, Mr. President.
Any discussion? Seeing none, Senator Brewer, you're recognized to close. Senator Brewer waives closing. Question for the body is, shall LB 973 be withdrawn? All in favor, vote aye. All opposed, vote nay. Of all those voted who wish to? Mr. Clerk, please record.
32 ayes, no nays to withdraw the bill, Mr. President.
The motion passes. The bill is withdrawn. Mr. Clerk, next item. Introduction of new bills.
Legislative Bill 1302, offered by Senator Lippincott. It's a bill for an act relating to cybersecurity to adopt the Cybersecurity Preparedness Act, declare an emergency. 1303 by Senator Lippincott. It's a bill for an act relating to cybersecurity to require the employment of an ethical hacker by the Nebraska State Patrol. 1304 by Senator Raybold. It's a bill for an act relating to federal grants to direct the Department of Environment and Energy to coordinate and cooperate with the Nebraska tribal communities on obtaining certain federal grants and declare an emergency. 1305 by Senator Ben Hansen. It's a bill for an act relating to revenue and taxation to prohibit tax liability on the purchase, sale, or exchange of gold or silver bullion, to define and redefine terms, change sales tax exemption provisions relating to currency and bullion, provide an income tax adjustment for the net capital losses and gains of the sale or exchange of gold or silver bullion, provide an operative date, and repeal original sections. 1306 by the Education Committee. It's a bill for an act relating to education, to change provision relating to fees for a certificate of permit issued by the Commissioner of Education, to eliminate and change funds, to change, provide, and eliminate powers and duties of the State Board of Education and the Commissioner of Education relating to standards of professional practices for teacher administrators, investigations and hearings relating to misconduct by certificate holders, the power to issue writs of subpoena or subpoena witnesses in investigation or misconduct, to eliminate provision relating to the Professional Practices Commission, harmonize provision, repeal the original sections, to outright repeal section 79 and 862, 864, 865, 869, and 871, revised statute Nebraska section 79, 861, and 863, revised statute scheme sub 2022. 1307 by Senator Von Gillern. It's a bill for an act relating to insurance to require the Director of Insurance to identify a health benefit in excess of essential health benefits as required by 42 U.S. Code annotated 18022, provide reimbursements for qualified health plan issues as prescribed, to require the Director of Insurance to include reimbursement costs in the Director's budget request, provide powers, duties for the Director of Insurance, the Department of Insurance, create a fund, harmonize provisions. 1308, offered by Senator Von Gillern. It's a bill for an act relating to revenue and taxation, to impose sales and use taxes on certain services, to eliminate a sales and use tax exemption, to harmonize provisions, provide an operative date, repeal the original sections, to outright repeal section 772704, .64, be issued by statute of Nebraska and declare an emergency. Legislative Bill 1309, offered by Senator Linehan. It's a bill for enacting related revenue taxation, providing income tax deduction for the cost of medical care as prescribed, and repeal the original sections. 1310, offered by Senator Albright. It's a bill for enacting related revenue taxation, to adopt the Advertising Services Tax Act, to eliminate certain sales and use tax exemptions, to harmonize provisions, provide an operative date, repeal the original section, to outright repeal section 772704.38, issued by statute of Nebraska and declare an emergency. Time.
Turning to the agenda, Mr. Clerk, first item, please.
Mr. President, the first item this morning is a proposed rules change number 27, offered by Senator Arch.
Senator Arch, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. Rule change 27 is a result of it was a piece of that came out of my LR 179 study over the summer, and it's moving the statement of intent from what is now 24 hours prior to the bill's hearing to 3 calendar days prior to the bill's hearing. So I want to stop or pause for just a second. I want to talk about the LR 179 because LR 179 and I spoke at Legislative Council to some degree about what the recommendations were that came out of that. This is one of those recommendations, but LR 179 had to do with public input. And how can we improve the opportunity for public input? Make it easier, make it clearer, make expectations clearer, all of those things. And so a number of things came out of that LR 179 study, including website redesign, an easier bill tracker, and that will help all of us as well. Online comments available now, more opportunity for online comments. A number of things, expectations in particular regarding annotated hearing procedures, our large hearings that we had last year, understanding exactly for the public what they can expect, for the senators what they can expect, and we've had a good discussion on that. And then this last one, or one of the last ones, had to do with this statement of intent deadline. This was a request because what happens often is that in the flurry of bills that are moving and in committee, it is often very difficult to track those, to know, should I be following those? And this statement of intent is a summary statement. So the public can see that, they can read the statement of intent, they can decide whether or not they want to come and testify or send in a comment online, and having that out ahead of time for the public, I think, would be very beneficial. So when I proposed this rule change, I actually proposed a 5-day instead of a 3-day, but as we met in exec session, some of the concern was regarding with the flow of bills and how fast that moves during the hearing times, will we be able to meet that deadline of 5 days in advance? And it was felt, and the committee felt, as though that if we took that to 3 days, that certainly would be an improvement over 24 hours, and yet the staff would be able to meet that deadline. So with that, we moved it to 3 days, and that is the proposal that is before you. I would encourage you, and I would ask you to vote yes on this. I think it is a good move so that the public can have some extra time to understand whether or not they want to engage in a bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Arch. Turning to the queue, Senator Dungan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I do rise today in support of Speaker Arch's proposed rule change 27. As we've talked about, I think, multiple times, it's always a little bit precarious when you're changing the rules halfway through a biennium. But again, the reality of the situation is where we are. And I think that having had some good debate and thought surrounding these at the Rules Committee, some of these rules, I think, are substantive and could potentially help the public in understanding what's going on. So I just want to speak a little bit in favor of this and kind of articulate why I think this is important, both as a senator and as somebody who supports and wants to encourage participation from the public. These statements of intent that we're talking about are are really, really helpful in understanding what actually is in a bill. As a lot of people know, you can log on to the legislature's website. You can type in the LB number, LB 857 or whatever you might look at, and then go ultimately click on the statement of intent, and that'll give you a little snapshot of what exactly is in that bill. Sometimes that can be really small. It can say, just a couple of sentences getting to the heart of what the bill does. Other times it can be a paragraph or a little bit longer, trying to give you a little bit more detail about what's inside one of these bills. Obviously, that can be helpful for a senator when we are getting ready to go into a committee hearing and you are looking at the 5 or 6 different things that you're going to be debating or discussing that day in committee. You can click on each of those, and prior to actually reading the legislation before you go into the committee, which I think everyone should do. You also can look at the statement of intent, which can give you a little snapshot as to what to look for in that bill. That's also then obviously helpful, as Speaker Arch said, for the public. They get to have a chance to see what's going to be in the bills that may or may not pertain to them. And I also think looking at that statement of intent prior to reading the actual body of the legislation can provide some useful context for what the legislation is intended to do. Sometimes when you're reading legislation, one word may be crossed out or another sentence may be added. And on first blush, that piece of legislation may appear to not really change anything, or you might not understand what all is going into that. But if you look at the statement of intent, it can actually, I think, provide some really helpful context, again, for the public to understand what the goal was in those slight modifications to help you understand what everything with regard to those modifications gets to. The 3 days that we're talking about here, I think, does represent a compromise, as many of the rules have thus far. Again, I want to laud Speaker Arch and the Rules Committee for going through these and discussing them and reaching some consensus on what I think some of the best wording for these rules could be. 24 hours, in my opinion, simply wasn't enough. I don't think that provided enough time for the public or for senators or for their staff to review all the bills that were inside a committee or things that you were going to be discussing on the floor. 5 days, however, I do understand the fact that might be a little bit onerous on staff. Our staff are fantastic. Our LAs and our AAs work incredibly hard. And the fact that they have a lot of different moving pieces happening all at once, I understand how that can make it difficult for 5 days to be the requisite time to get those statements of intent in. So I think 3 calendar days prior to the bill's hearing is representative of a true compromise in the circumstance. I don't believe that would be overly onerous or burdensome on staff. But again, I'm open to hearing other people's opinions. I'd be curious what other members of the Rules Committee thought in debating this rule and modifying the 5 to 3 days and how they landed on that. And I'm always open to change my mind when it comes to amendments that may or may not have to go up in proposed Rule Change 27. Thank you, Mr. President. But colleagues, I would urge you to support this rule change. I do think this is better for the body. I think it's better for our staff to be able to look at those bills prior to committee hearings. And most of all, I think it is helpful for the public to understand what we do. As always, I believe the public's oversight on what we do is important, and being able to have the public chime in on these bills is crucial. It's part of why we have these hearings. So please support Rule Change 27, and I look forward to hearing other people's thoughts. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Duncan. Senator DeBoer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I just wanted to, I won't belabor the point, but I wanted to thank the Speaker for his LR 179 and his attempt to try to figure out the best way to get the public involved. I also want to thank the folks who act as our second house in Nebraska, the people of Nebraska, the people watching now, who have done the work to say, hey, we want to be involved, and who get involved and stay involved, not just on one issue, but on, all of the issues that we face. And I think that's really great. So I was wondering if Senator Arch would yield to question.
Senator Arch, will you yield to a question?
Yes, I will.
Speaker Arch, can you tell us about your LR 179? What was the reason that you brought this interim study?
So LR 179 was a result of the numerous calls that my office received over the session last year. Frustration from the public, quite frankly. In particular, the focus was on the large hearings that filled our hallways and overflow rooms and how we manage those. But it was broader than that. It was really the entire issue of public input. So it went to the website, all of that. If the public is interested, the LR 179 report is available on our website. If you go to the homepage, you go to reports on the left side, you go to standing committees, you go to the executive board, the executive committee, you will find LR 179.
Can you do that one more time? Because I think that might be kind of hard to follow. So,
Well, this is, yes, and I'd be happy to do that because this is one of our issues with a website that you have to work to find some of this stuff. So if you go to the homepage on the left side, you can go move down, you will find reports. In there, you will find standing committees, you will find executive board, you will find our LR 179 in the list of reports there.
all right, thank you. That's very helpful, I'm sure, to folks. Were there other major findings? You said that you found that they were frustrated with some of the long hearings. Were there other major findings?
Yeah, the large hearings was the number one issue, and that we have now developed some guidelines that the chairs may use and choose to use, and we're calling them annotated hearing guidelines that will set expectations for everybody. So when you come, you're guaranteed 3 minutes to speak if you have that opportunity to speak. We're going to do the 1 hour, and neutral. So 1 hour proponents, 1 hour opponents, and then neutral testimony. So it just clarifies those expectations. And I think that was probably the largest, but the clerk is doing website redesign as a result of this. Online comments are going to be made easier. We're moving our deadline from 8. Let's see, I think it was, hang on just a second here. It was noon the day before the hearing to now 8 a.m. the day of the hearing. So those comments can still be put in day of the hearing. So we did a number of things in response to the feedback that we received.
I think that's really great. And I think it's important to have moved that online comment deadline to the day of, because I know there are folks who would intend to come to something and then there's weather. And so they can't come. And so the day of, they can see that and they can put those comments in. So at least they can be part of it. So I really think this is a job well done in terms of asking folks to help us understand what's difficult in the process for them and get through those snags. So I really want to thank the speaker, and I want to say to the people of Nebraska that if there are additional snags that we have not yet discovered in the process for participating with your unicameral, just let us know. And I think the speaker probably would still be willing to entertain emails. I certainly would, and I know others, your own senator would be willing to. And just let us know what problems you might have or what difficulties you might be facing in interfacing with us. And I'm sure we'll try to work on them because it's always a work in progress. So just wanted to thank the speaker for his work this summer, and we'll continue to try to do better. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Senator John Kavanaugh, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I also rise in support of rule change 27. And a lot of folks have said it's a good thing, gives people more of a chance to see what's out there and respond. And I guess my only question about it, and I'll just throw this out to the ether because I don't know who might be able to answer it, but what happens if somebody doesn't submit the committee statement or the statement of intent to the committee currently by 24 hours before, but if you didn't do it for the 3 days before, is there any repercussion for that? Or is this just, we're putting it in the rules and saying, if we put it in the rules, people are more likely to do what's in the rules than to go above and beyond or to do what's worse? Or is there any effective, I guess, recourse or repercussion for somebody? If I'm somebody who's looking at a bill and it's coming up in 3 days and there's no statement of intent, do I have some sort of recourse? Can we, if somebody doesn't do that, can we extend the comment deadline that Senator DeBoer and Speaker Arch were just talking about. If the intention is to get the information out there, to allow people to decide whether they want to respond, is there some necessity to create something that gives effect to this? Because a rule that just says, has to be done by this time is not self-effectuating. So that's, I guess, a question I'd be interested to hear other folks' opinion on it. That said, I do agree with the idea, even without that we should extend it. We should be submitting these earlier, allow the committee to work through things faster, give everybody more of an opportunity to look at what's coming up, decide what their position on it is, and respond. So I'd be in support of rule change 27, but if anybody is listening and they know the answer to that question or have thoughts on it, I'd love to hear it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Blood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow senators, friends all, I stand in support of proposed rule change 27. And with that, I would like to add the following. It's been my experience that many Nebraskans believe the legislature has created much to doubt in the last few years when it comes to transparency, accuracy, and accountability. There's so much made-up news that has lowered their confidence in our ability to govern. We currently are in a state of distrust. They want basic facts. They want easier access. And they want us, this body, to give them the information they need to achieve that level of trust. And we do those things. Many of us have weekly newsletters that we share with our constituents. We make sure often to make personal phone calls to those that are struggling within our communities and offer them resources. We have so much power and ability to make things better for the people here in Nebraska, but we don't always take those opportunities. Often it's our staff that we delegate things to. We step aside and leave the hard stuff to them instead of us doing the hard stuff, which really would be a great lesson if we would dive in and deal with those angry people, deal with those people that are struggling on a one-on-one basis, because you're going to learn so much more by doing that. So when we work to achieve the level of trust, it's not just what we do in the body, it's not just our rules, it's how we act as senators. So by better clarifying the process, by creating rule changes like this, we are helping to meet these expectations. We are addressing things like the window of time. We are setting the bar higher to remind Nebraskans that this is the people's house, not our house, not Senator Arch's house, not the governor's house. This is their house. And that wasn't meant as an insult, Senator Arch. You were just the example that was in front of me. And we are beholden to the masses. And we need to quit bending to the vocal minority when we do our work. And so with that, I say thank you to the Rules Committee. Thank you, Senator Arch, and all involved with this rule change. I love the fact that we are working for greater transparency, greater accountability, and making this process work more smoothly. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator McKinney, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Oh, I got shocked. I rise in opposition of the proposed rules change. I don't think that it's a bad rule change. Back to everything I've said prior, I don't think we should be changing rules in the middle of the session. Whether it's good or bad rule change, I think we should wait till the biennium is over and we change the rules if needed at the start of another one. But we're trying to change the rules in the middle of the game. And I was on my way down here, I was thinking about all the rule changes that were proposed and the ones that we might get to or might not get to. And the way it's been going, all of these have been passing. So I think I got a good idea why we might not get to some. But I mean, if y'all are going to pass them all, we might as well get to everything and have a real conversation about those other ones that people don't want to get to or talk about. You know, there's the secret ballot change that is proposed. I don't know if I like it or not, but since y'all passing everything, everybody should just turn off their lights, vote yes on the, I'm not voting yes, but everybody else should, because you're voting yes anyway. So why are we wasting time? Let's just get to everything so we could do other things. We're just wasting time here because you're voting yes to pass all these rules changes. So why don't we just get to everything, honestly? Besides wasting time and sitting here and talking about the nuance of all these rules when it really doesn't matter because they're all being passed anyway. So we should just get to everything and have a conversation about them. No matter if they're controversial or good rules, let's just have a conversation about everything before Friday. You're passing everything anyway. So let's have a conversation about the ones that you probably don't want to pass or you probably don't want to have a conversation about. That would make this a lot more enjoyable, probably for the public, probably for everybody in here. Let's talk about them. I don't think we should be changing these things. But if you're going to just pass all these rules changes, why are we standing up talking about them? Why don't we sit down, let Speaker Arch or whoever else proposed to change, stand up, open, close, vote, so we could talk about all these things. And then if we get to a controversial one, we get to one. But sitting here for 3+ hours or all day talking about 2 rules that you're just gonna pass anyway is literally a waste of time. We could be doing a lot more better things in this place than sitting here talking about things that are gonna be passed anyway. Everybody knows it. The only few that might not get passed is the ones we're avoiding getting to. But since you're passing all these, everybody just sit down and let's pass all the rules. Senator Kavanaugh did ask a good question. What happens if I don't turn in my statement of intent 3 days prior? What's the penalty there? I could wait till 24 hours. What is the penalty? It's like you have a rule, but there's no accountability in the rule at all. It's just maybe the clerk's office or the chair of that committee is going to reach out to your office and say, hey, send your statement intent. But because there's no mechanism to hold me accountable, I probably could wait the 24 hours prior or the day of, because what is the real penalty? We just got to think about these things a lot deeper. And if we're going to stand up and talk about all these rules and waste time, just vote yes on the things you're already going to vote yes on, and let's just get through this. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator Brandt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I'd like to thank Senator Erdman and the Rules Committee for all their hard work on this, and Speaker Arch and the Clerk of the Legislature, Brandon Metzler, for all their hard work on this. Senator McKinney, I agree with you. There's on these 5-0 rule changes, there is no reason we shouldn't just rip right through these and get to the other ones. But I have also learned in being here 6 years, what's practical doesn't always translate well to this body. I am in full agreement with this rule change. We've had a number of constituents contact us in the past and what's this about? And I do think this will serve the public well. The sooner you can get the intent of the bill out there, that they can review it, and it's just a snapshot of what the bill is unless they read the bill themselves. If I were to amend this, the one amendment I would like to see is the fiscal note be put in our hands 3 days before bill introduction. I cannot count the number of times where it is the morning of and we get the fiscal note 6 hours, 4 hours before bill introduction, and it is dramatically different than what we anticipated. So that is something we may work on next year as a rules change or look into that. But those are my 2 cents. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brandt. Senator Frederickson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's good to see a fellow classmate in the chair up there. Good morning, Nebraskans. Good morning, colleagues. I rise in support of this proposed rule change. I think this was a thoughtful rule change. Before I get in there, though, I just want to also acknowledge today is the last day of bill introduction. We have 10 days to introduce bills here in Nebraska, and I want to just give a quick little shout out to all of the bill drafters who I think all of us in here certainly understand and know with all of the last minute changes, all the last minute three-parting. The bill drafters have been putting in a lot of really long hours, and we are super grateful to all of you up there for the work you do. Thank you for helping support us in everything that you do. Like I said, I stand in support of this. I think, in general, my colleagues have sort of touched on all the reasons why this is good, just in terms of transparency and public awareness of what we're bringing to the legislature. I did have one question regarding this proposed rule change. So folks who are following along, it's basically, essentially what this does is that it changes the statement of intent from 24 hours to 3 calendar days before. And I was kind of curious to learn a little bit more about that decision. I mean, I think 3 days is a good one, but calendar days in particular stands out to me. We obviously have weekends, we have holidays that could get in the way of that. So I was curious about why not legislative days, why not business days? So I'm wondering if the speaker might be willing to yield to a question in that theme.
Senator Arch, would you yield to a question?
Yes, I will.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can you shed some light on the decision to make this three calendar days and as opposed to 3 legislative days, 3 business days?
So the attempt was to tie it to the hearing schedule. So right now we have a rule that says the announced hearing schedule must be 7 days ahead of the hearing, 7 calendar days ahead of the hearing. And so this was an attempt to tie it to that. So you have 7 days notice on the hearing. You have 3 days notice now. If this rule is passed, you have 3 days for this statement of intent, calendar days tying to those 7. And that's the responsibility of the legislative aide in the senator's office that is introducing the bill.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So that makes sense to me. I mean, I think that provides some consistency for the two. Obviously, the awareness of the calendar days on both of them, I think, makes sense. So I am going to support this proposed rule change. Again, I appreciate the speaker for bringing this and as well as for bringing LR 179. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Frederickson. Senator Arch, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to respond to Senator John Kavanaugh's question regarding consequences for not hitting that deadline. And here is my understanding. As I just responded to Senator Frederickson's question, it is the legislative aide's responsibility to draft the statement of intent. Oftentimes what will happen is that bills will be brought on behalf of, bills will be developed and then meetings with senators, will you introduce this bill? Associations often will come with a bill and say, we'd really like this bill introduced. And at that point, many times the association is involved as well in helping draft the statement of intent. And so that's very helpful, but nonetheless, it is the legislative aides. You don't want to get too far out because oftentimes once we start our committee hearings, which will begin next Monday, things move pretty quickly in those offices. And for a senator that has a number of bills, there's a number of statement of intents, there's a number of things going on in those offices. So if they don't hit that deadline, then of course there's counseling of the staff. But there's supporting technology as well, from my understanding. So what technology does right now is it tracks. When that statement of intent is submitted, the button is pushed, technology automatically knows that. And if it is, as the rule is currently written, if it is ahead of that 24 hours, all good. If there is no statement of intent submitted within 24 hours, then a message goes out immediately to the senator's staff indicating, and it's from my understanding, I haven't seen the message, but I understand it's quite direct. You have missed your deadline on submitting of a statement of intent on this bill because the technology is also tracking the date of the hearing. So now what would happen is the technology would be changed to back that up to 3 days, and the same thing would occur. So there is notice you are going to hit that. And then, of course, if this is a pattern, then it is the counseling of the staff that would occur. So I just wanted to respond to Senator Kavanaugh's question. That's my understanding of the process. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Arch. Senator John Kavanaugh, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Speaker Arch, for that clarification, answering that question. I think that's a good system, and it makes sense why we're going with 3 days and not 5 days because of the hearing notice 7-day schedule. Gives people at least some time to see that this hearing's been scheduled. But I actually punched in. I do appreciate the Speaker's response, but I punched in because as we're talking about timing, timeliness is next to godliness, I think, or is it cleanliness? Well, either way. But to be timely, I would point out that today is January 17th, and it is the other Senator Kavanaugh's birthday. So please join me in congratulating her on surviving another year. And wishing her a happy birthday is maybe the more normal thing to say. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Conrad, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I rise in support of this measure and appreciate the comments that each colleague have entered into the record in our deliberations this morning in advance of this thoughtful proposal to amend our rules. To echo some of the themes that have already been stated about why this is an important update and amendment to our permanent rules, I do believe that it helps to foster concurrent and important goals of citizen engagement and transparency. Nebraska has a proud and long tradition of a commitment to open government as inscribed on our very capital and carried through in our institutions and our legal framework. We have a strong and proud public records law. We have a strong and proud open meetings law. We, as the unicameral institution, some of our defining features of this unique form of government seek to always enhance transparency. Every single bill that's introduced has a hearing. There is no secret conference committee, as is present in our sister states and on the federal level, that foster secrecy between the houses of government. These are key defining important features about how we do our work. And this measure seeks to increase citizen engagement and increase transparency more quickly so that more people, more stakeholders within the legislature and externally have an opportunity to understand what the intent of the measure is as they prepare for the public hearings. Additionally, another feature that will be subject to debate later in this rules debate in the coming days that we may see on our agenda that has been advanced from the Rules Committee seeks to undermine that very commitment to transparency and citizen engagement that are bedrocks of our system, that are bedrocks of our proud political history, and that I want to flag and put a note in the record on this measure and to help to foster what will come in that debate as members of the Rules Committee have saw fit to advance a measure to keep the press out of our executive sessions, which has always been an important part of our unique institution and an important part of citizen engagement and transparency. So not only is this an important measure, but it lifts those important issues at play in other rules that will be coming before this body. I think it is misguided and shameful for this institution to consider pushing out government watchdogs that inform the electorate about who we are and what we're doing in their name and with their money. if colleagues do not feel as if they can defend confidently their convictions when deliberating a bill, that's on them. That is no reason to push out the press. That is no reason to undermine transparency. And so as you listen to this debate, as you cast your vote on this and other matters, I want to make it clear that there will be a vigorous debate, a vigorous challenge, and vigorous opposition to measures to undermine transparency that may come up later in this rules debate. By pushing the press out of our executive sessions, I ask my colleagues, what are you so afraid of and what are you trying to hide? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. I recognize Senator Slama.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I haven't had the chance to get on the mic during this rules debate. Figured I'd hop in. I am grateful about this discussion about transparency this morning, and I'll be brief. I really do hope that my colleagues now that are arguing for transparency, emphasizing the importance of transparency, I do hope that commitment to transparency extends to getting rid of secret ballots for committee chairs. I feel as though if you cannot defend publicly who you support and who you voted for committee chairs, you are just as guilty as hiding from the public. And to quote a colleague recently, what are you so afraid of and what are you hiding if no? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Senator Erdman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wasn't going to talk on this amendment to the rules because everybody in this room may be for that except Senator McKinney. But Senator Conrad has opened the discussion early on some of the other rule changes that will be coming. Her comment has already started the debate of what's going to happen later on today or tomorrow. And I am the one who has for 7 years brought the rule change to exclude the media. It is inappropriate to have an unelected person, the media, in our executive sessions. I've never served on a elected body before where anyone was in executive session except those who were required to be there. Case in point, last week we had a rules meeting, the rules hearing, and the media described what they seen or heard in the rules hearing. When they wrote their report, they had made a statement that I had said in the hearing that I did not say. Now, when I talked to the media about it and asked why they printed it as they did, they said, that's the way I perceived it. So here's the problem. When the media is in executive session, they write their report based on the lens that they look through. And you may not have said what they write, but that's what they interpret it to be. And if there were three of us standing on the street corner and we seen an accident in the intersection and the police came by to interview us individually, they would get three different reports about what happened. And so when the Rules Committee is meeting in executive session and the media is there, they're looking at the discussion slanted towards whoever's making the decision. So either you have the executive session open to everyone or no one. What the rule is going to say is that the media is excluded and the chairman of the committee can reinstate them. It's exactly the opposite of what we do now. So if Senator Conrad becomes a chairman of a committee, she would be able to allow the media in if she so chooses. So it's opt-in instead of opt-out. That's all that it is. And so as we have debated these rules, and we've done that quite extensively, and I did agree with Senator McKinney, let's just vote. But as we go through that discussion, you will understand that if this was a bicameral, if this were a bicameral instead of a unicameral, we wouldn't be talking about rule changes. We would just make those rule changes. So these rules have been set up and put in place over the years to give the minority the authority. And all we're asking for is let's have a fair and open and fair debate about what we're going to do. And when one body has 65% of the votes, they ought to be able to make changes if they need to. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Slum, I voted for you for chair. I'm fine with telling people who I voted for, although I don't think anybody ran against you, but I still think you're doing a great job. So I don't mind having transparent votes on committee chairs. I very ardently think that the press should be in our executive sessions because they are really responsible to the public, and we are also responsible to the public. So I think that's a partnership that should continue. But of course, I stand in opposition to changing the rules mid-biennium, so I won't be voting for any of these things. And I appreciate this rule change today, but again, I don't think we should be changing the rules right now. We're having a rules debate right now. We should be debating policy. Thank you to my brother for the birthday greetings. And like a true Kavanaugh, his birthday present to me was work. He gave me a constitutional amendment to turn in, which I very much appreciate because I realized today I'm 45. And one thing, I have some things in common with the 45th president, hair color being one of them, I guess. But one thing I do not have in common with him is wealth. So thank you to my brother for the constitutional amendment to address the pay of everyone in here. Get me maybe $5 closer to the 45th president. That was pretty much it. Thank you, and I yield the remainder of my time to the chair.
Senator Cavanaugh. Senator Conrad, you're recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Again, good morning, colleagues. Just to continue our debate and deliberations in regards to our proud traditions of open government as Nebraskans, we also have proud traditions of nonpartisanship. And that is why there is a hallmark and a feature to the secret ballot in regards to our selection of leadership. And I want to make sure to clarify and to clearly distinguish the different types of executive sessions, because I think that perhaps my friend Senator Erdman had conflated some of those differences when it comes to the term of executive session. I know my friend Senator Erdman and others in this body have served their community admirably through service at county board level or school board level or city council levels. And I would remind my friend Senator Erdman and others that typically, it's my understanding, not having served on those bodies, but being a engaged citizen, that in many instances, those local entities of government do have a secret ballot for different aspects of leadership, perhaps not all. I don't wish to paint with too broad a brush in that regard and don't pretend to understand the internal policy and nuance of every single entity of government that spreads across our great state. But that is to advance nonpartisanship. It is also to advance collaboration and to ensure that personalities on those tough votes do not come into play. And it is akin to the sacredness of a secret ballot that each of us enjoy when we cast our votes in a primary or general or special election. The reason we have secret ballots in place is so that there can be no coercion or undue influence when it comes to a citizen deciding how to cast their vote, which is sacred, whether that coercion comes from community leaders or employers, what have you. That's why we have those secret ballots, and that's why we have secret ballots, particularly in legislative leadership, to put aside partisanship and to ensure collegiality. The executive sessions that my friend Senator Erdman was talking about, there's some important distinctions here. There are executive sessions available underneath the open meetings laws and in the Nebraska Legislature in narrow and carefully circumscribed situations that call for such appropriately. Personnel issues, litigation issues. These are typical reasons why a public body or even committees of the Nebraska Legislature would need to exclude the public or the press for dealing with those kinds of matters. However, when it comes to deliberations on a policy matter, it is inappropriate for public bodies to go into a closed executive session, and I do not believe that is permissible under our open meetings laws, Senator Erdman, so you may want to double check that. If entities of local government are entering executive sessions to have policy deliberations without it being moored or anchored to that very specific reason, something like personnel or litigation, that would not be allowed under our open records laws. And so we need to have some consistency in regards to how we carry out our work in the Nebraska Legislature as well. Thank you, Mr. President. The reason that the press is in our executive sessions, and they can be excluded when sensitive matters like personnel or national security or litigation comes up, they're there to report on deliberations of policy matters. And that is a key and important distinction, which I think my friends have glossed over. As we head into the debate for whether or not we will continue secret ballots in our leadership, I also pose this to my friends. Much like our individual voting practices, take a ballot selfie. If you want to tell your colleagues and your constituents who you're voting for, nothing prohibits you from doing that. So if you haven't already done that, that's a remedy that's currently available without undermining the rules and traditions of the nonpartisan unicameral legislature. I look forward to the debate. Thank you, Mr. President.
Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Archer recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for the discussion on Rule Change 27, and I would ask for a yes vote.
Question for the body is amendments to permanent rules, proposed rule change 27, Rule 5, Section 4. All in favor, vote aye. All opposed, vote nay. Mr. Clerk?
35 ayes, 1 nay on the adoption of the amendment to the permanent rules, Mr. President.
The amendment is adopted. Mr. Clerk, for announcements and new bills.
Mr. President, for announcements, an amendment to be printed to LB 1308 offered by Senator Von Gillern, and I have notice of committee hearings from the Revenue Committee. New bills, Legislative Bill 1311 offered by Senator Meyer. It's a bill for enacting revenue and taxation to eliminate certain sales and use tax exemptions, impose sales and use taxes on certain services, harmonize provisions, provide an operative date, repeal the original sections, declare an emergency. 1312 offered by Senator Dover. It's a bill for enacting landlords and tenants to provide for electronic notices by landlords to tenants under the Uniform Residential Landlord and Tenant Act and the Mobile Home Landlord and Tenant Act to define terms, to harmonize provisions, and repeal the original sections. 1313 offered by Senator Dover. It's a bill for enacting the health benefit plans to exempt certain health benefit plans from insurance regulation. 1314, offered by Senator McKinney. It's a bill for enacting relating to the inland port authorities to create a fund to provide powers and duties for the state treasurer, provide for certain grants, to change provision relating to the credit of interest from certain funds, eliminate obsolete provisions, to harmonize provisions, and repeal original sections, declare an emergency. 1315, offered by Senator Linehan. It's a bill for enacting relating to revenue and taxation to change the sales tax rate, to harmonize provisions, provide an operative date, repeal the original sections. 1316 by Senator Linehan, bill for enacting relating to School District Property Tax Limitation Act to eliminate provision relating to the increase of base growth percentages for school districts, to harmonize provisions and repeal the original sections. 1317, offered by Senator Linehan. It's a bill for enacting relating to revenue and taxation to state findings. 1318, offered by Senator Linehan. Bill for enacting relating to revenue and taxation to change provision relating to certain transfers to the cash reserve fund, to change the Nebraska Property Tax Incentive Act as prescribed, repeal the original sections, declare an emergency. 1319, offered by Senator Linehan, is a bill for enacting relating to revenue and taxation to eliminate a definition and a sales and use tax exemption relating to data centers, provide an operative date to repeal section 77270154, 772704.62, reissued by statute Nebraska, and to declare an emergency. 1320, offered by Senator Ballard. It's a bill for enacting relating to the emergency medical services to require emergency medical services to report patient overdose information as prescribed, harmonize provisions, repeal the original sections. 1321, offered by Senator Arch, is a bill for enacting relating to the Office of Public Counsel to name the Office of Public Counsel Act to state legislative findings, change provisions of the Office of Inspector General of the Nebraska Child Welfare Act and the Office of Inspector General of the Nebraska Correctional System Act as prescribed, change provision relating to the powers, duties, terms of office of the Public Counsel, the Inspector General for Child Welfare, the Inspector General for the Nebraska Correctional System, change powers and duties of the Exec Board of the Legislative Council, and provision relating to the Legislative Council, define, redefine, and eliminate terms, to eliminate provision relating to certain office powers and procedures, to harmonize provisions, provide a duty for the revisor statute, to repeal the original sections, to outright repeal section 43, 4304, 4304.01, 4304.2, 4305, 4306, 43430601, 434307, 43470701, 434308, 434309, 4310, 433311, 4312, 433313, 4314, 4315, 43, 4316, 4319, 49, 1406, reissued by statute Nebraska, and to declare an emergency. 1322, offered by Senator Vargas. It's a bill for enacting related to schools to require the school council spend a certain percentage of such council's time during normal school hours in the direct counseling of students as prescribed. LB 1323 by Senator Vargas. It's a bill for enacting relating to appropriations to appropriate funds to the Department of Economic Development. 1324 by Senator Conrad, a bill for enacting relating to revenue and taxation to adopt the Child Tax Credit Act to amend certain tax credit refunds from claims of creditors to harmonize provisions to repeal original sections. 1325 by Senator Vargas, bill for enacting the Pharmacy Practice Act to amend section 382801 to allow pharmacists and local public health departments to distribute fentanyl test scripts as prescribed and to repeal the original sections. 1326 by Senator Duncan. It's a bill for enacting the Nebraska Housing Agency Act to change the tax and assessment provisions, repeal the original section. 1307 by Senator Brewer. It's a bill for enacting the Political Accountability and Disclosure Act to amend section 491402 to change legislative findings and to repeal the original sections. That's all I have at this time, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Next item on the agenda.
Mr. President, next item on the agenda is proposed rules change number 19, offered by Senator Arch.
Senator Arch, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. So rule change 19 This defines appropriations bills. And so it strikes language in Rule 7, Section 3, adds the definition of appropriation bills in Rule 8, Section 1. This really has to do with scheduling on the floor. What do we do with we have the mainline budget bills. We understand that. But there are others surrounding bills that definitely have impact on the budget. So we thought we needed to define those so when that mainline budget comes to the floor, these appropriation bills also come to the floor, as well as a couple others, and I'll explain in just a second. So it codifies by listing in the rules the different bills that have traditionally been part of the budget process, not necessarily the budget bill itself, but the budget process. So any appropriation bill would be referenced to the Appropriations Committee. It does identify those bills, and it specifically says it's going to go to the Appropriations Committee. However, there are two that often, or should, and will, if this rule is passed, trail the appropriation bills that are identified here. One is judges' salaries bills. That'll continue to be referenced to the Judiciary Committee, but this rule change identifies that this bill will be scheduled on the agenda following the budget bills. This was a discussion in the last session. Judges' bills this judge's bill is heard, the salaries bill is heard in Judiciary. And because it's not heard in appropriations, it's not necessarily part of the budget package. But in this case, we're going to say that the judge's salaries bills is going to trail those appropriation bills that we have defined there, and claims bills. And so claims bills will be considered as at floor debate following the appropriations bills and the judge's salaries bills. Claims bills have been referenced to business and labor. And so those two then would be identified not as appropriations bills, but as bills that will trail the main budget bills, the appropriation bills. So I originally proposed that judges' salary bills also go to appropriations. I received good feedback from Judiciary, from Senator Wayne and others. No, let's keep those over there. So I changed that, and we've modified from the original proposed bill as a result of that input. So it simply clarifies that the appropriations bills will be heard on the floor, followed by the claims bill and judges' salaries, and they all have budget impact. So with that, I will ask for your yes vote on this and ready for discussion.
Thank you, Senator Arch. I recognize Senator DeBoer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was wondering if Senator Arch would yield to a question.
Senator Arch, will you yield to a question?
Yes, I will.
Senator Arch, I noticed when I was looking at this, in addition to the other things that this bill does, it also increases the number of bills that are not divisible. Was that your intent? Because it says at the top there, such a call for division shall not be allowed for, and you have the main line, the deficit, the construction, and the funds transfer. And then here, now it says bills listed under Rule 8, Section 1B, which is the deficit bill, the capital construction bill, the funds transfer, and then also the appropriations for members of the legislature, for salaries of constitutional officers, and the cash reserve fund transfer bill. Was it your intent to add those bills to now also not be divisible?
Yes. Okay. I didn't know. I forgot whether I had been called on, but yes. Yes. Well, it would add those three. One in particular, the members' appropriations for the pay of members of the legislature isn't divisible right now. I mean, there's no way to divide that. It's not in sections. And so that one you can set aside. It would add salaries of constitutional officer of the government and the cash reserve fund transfer bill. Yes, those would be added to non-divisible as well. And the understanding there is, again, is that they are a single budgeted item that definitely impacts the budget, and so I thought it appropriate that those would be considered part of the appropriations bills.
The only question I would have about that is whether or not that would, well, the legislature, you're right, set it aside. But the constitutional officers, I want to think through this. Are we giving away our ability to sort of restructure so that as a body, maybe we say, some officers should be adjusted and other officers should not, and that sort of thing? Are we losing anything there?
I don't think we are, but I mean, that's a point of discussion.
Okay. And then the cash reserve fund transfer bill. I'm not as aware of all the different pieces of that bill. So does that come out like an appropriations bill where we get line items of the various transfers? Or is there just one transfer into the general fund and then it goes from the general funds out?
So you'd receive the detail of that, but it would be a transfer. It would be a transfer. I would also point out that while this isn't divisible, it is amendable. And so you can always bring an amendment to a specific piece of these bills that have been included now in the appropriations bills.
That's wonderful. That makes me feel a lot more comfortable about that. Yeah, I think that makes some sense. So yes, we're not dividing them out because it's like the budget. We want to have this large conversation kind of all at once. But maybe I'll ask Senator Clemens. He's not here. I'll see if there's another appropriations member. I don't see Senator Wishart, who's the vice chair. Oh, Senator Wishart. Maybe Senator Wishart would yield to a question. Thank you, Senator Arch. Senator Wishart.
Senator Wishart, will you yield to a question?
Yes. Yes.
Senator Wishart, I don't remember how the cash reserve fund transfer bill comes out. Is that just one transfer or are there individual transfers that are line items for particular things? Do you know that?
There are individual transfers, but I would have to let me think a little more on that. I was not prepared to answer that question.
I'm sorry. I totally blindsided you. Okay. Well, either way, the fact that we can amend it, that would probably allow us to amend in any way we wish. So I think that alleviates my concern. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Senator McKinney, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise against this rules change, and specifically for a specific reason, the capital construction. And you probably wonder, why am I highlighting capital construction bill not being divisible? Because last year, this legislature voted to build a prison that was placed into the capital construction bill. Many people voted for the capital construction bill. I'm not sure if they knew they were voting to build a prison. Maybe they were, but they did vote to build a prison. Just like the judge's salary, I believe any budget request to build facilities or anything under the Nebraska Department of Punitive Services should be sent to the Judiciary Committee. Because if it's sent to appropriations, nothing against them, they deal with a lot of requests and things like that. And there were some things that came out, after they voted for the prison out of appropriations, there were some things that I believe needed to be changed. We needed to make sure they were making the department do programming, making sure that the department finished their studies. Those type of things didn't happen straight out of appropriations. We had to make amendments on the floor to ensure those things happen. So I believe any budget request from the Nebraska Department of Punitive Services needs to be sent to the Judiciary Committee, just like the judges' salaries. You guys voted for a prison last year. And I don't even know if some people are aware that they voted for a prison last year because it was baked into the capital construction bill. And that should have been divisible because that is an important conversation. That was the most expensive budget request in state history, I believe, to build a $350 million plus prison that doesn't even account for operating expenses or supply chain issues and things like that. So I'm not going to be surprised probably next year the Department of Punitive Services and the governor's office is going to come back and say, hey, we need some more money to build a prison that we don't need. So I personally believe there should be an amendment to this rule that also has D. The bills concerning the Nebraska Department of Punitive Services shall be sent to the Judiciary Committee. The Appropriations Committee does a good job. I'm not knocking them, but they deal with a lot of budget requests and a lot of issues. I think any budget request from the Nebraska Department of Punitive Services should automatically go to the Judiciary Committee, just like the judges' salaries. It's only right. That's something we should think about here. Remember, you don't have to just vote for these things. We gotta have a real conversation and make some real changes. And maybe, just maybe, no, I'm not voting for it, but I do think if you're gonna vote for this, you should include an additional amendment that says budget requests from the Nebraska Department of Punitive Services should be sent to the Judiciary Committee, or we should be allowed to divide the capital construction bill because that's where they request their money from. And I personally believe that those requests should not just go to the Appropriations Committee. They should have to come sit in front of the Judiciary Committee and answer important questions like, how are you going to do programming? Have you completed your facility study? Those type of things I feel like got overlooked last year, and we had to make amendments on the floor because of that, which is why budget requests from the Nebraska Department of Punitive Services need to be sent to the Judiciary Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. I recognize Senator Conrad.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I rise with reservations in regards to the proposed rule change, even though I know my friend Speaker Arch is working in good faith to try and bring process improvements to our rules through the variety of proposals that he put forward, which I believe to be thoughtful and in many instances meritorious. But I do want to add a few points in regards to this specific rule change in terms of how it interfaces with our duty as legislators and our process overall. I do think that there is an important benefit in having a clear and uniform definition and understanding for all members and all stakeholders of what the budget bills are and are not. I think that that will help to remove ambiguities in that regard and definitely improve our referencing process and our deliberative process. However, one thing that I have been thinking about in regards to the restriction contained within this proposed rule change that does not allow for budget bills to be subject to division, I really see two sides of the coin here. On the one hand, because of the critical importance, the constitutional importance that is granted to the legislature, that has the power of the purse, that has the sole power of appropriation. In many ways, I can understand protecting the budgetary process to ensure its priority, to ensure its fidelity, to ensure that that critical work happens and is appropriately focused. On the other hand, I'm a bit concerned about removing opportunities under the rules for our budget that are available to every other measure that comes through the legislature. I think that in some ways it would be a disservice to the importance of the budgetary process to remove mechanisms of deliberation from that most important aspect of our work, yet allow it to be available to members for other legislative bills, resolutions, or measures. So I'm conflicted about how this could potentially play out. I'm also not aware of or familiar with a significant history within the Nebraska Legislature of seeking division of our budgetary bills or matters. If memory serves, I think there was an effort by then Senator Kittner, who I served with on the Appropriations Committee, I think at one point to perhaps seek a division of the budget or something similar thereto. It was widely recognized as a quote unquote more nuclear option to lawmaking that he was exploring at that time. But other than that instance, I'm not aware of a consistent practice where there have been efforts to divide the question in regards to our budgetary matters. So I don't want to overcorrect our rules in regards to an issue that has not been a significant barrier to efficient and effective lawmaking in Nebraska in general.
1 minute.
Additionally, thank you, Mr. President. I would pose these questions for the record, and I didn't have a chance to get over to ask my friend Speaker Arch, so I won't do it on the mic because I don't want to play got you. But I am also wondering if perhaps there is a distinction without a difference here. Even if we advance this measure that prohibits a division of budgetary matters, I don't believe there is anything to stop an individual member from filing specific amendments on each section that could strike or that could change in substance or from technical forms each aspect of those budget bills. So I'm not sure it would actually even have the intended purpose that would otherwise be available through the straight amendment process, and would like to open that open question for response and dialogue with any member. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator McKinney would move to amend the proposed rule change 19. In Rule 8, Section 1, subsection B on line 2 after capital construction bill, insert the following language: except capital construction bills concerning the Nebraska Department of Corrections. Additionally, insert subsection D to the rule. The bills pertaining to capital construction requests for the Nebraska Department of Corrections shall be referenced to the judiciary. That measure will be passed out to members.
Senator McKinney, you're recognized to open on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I brought this amendment, and thank you, Senator John Kavanaugh, for printing it for me. But I brought it because I think this is very important. The Nebraska Department of Punitive Services is either one or two worst prison systems in the country, really in the world. And we cannot just blindly let them get away with just being a horribly ran system. They shouldn't be allowed to just request funds from the legislature and it goes straight to appropriations. They should have to come sit in front of the Judiciary Committee and answer questions. Because I'll let you know again, last year, they did not have anything ready to address programming. They hadn't completed a facility study that they were requested to do years prior. There were many questions about that prison that I feel like did not get asked because it went straight to appropriations. If they're gonna make a budget request to build a new prison, add on to a prison, any type of facility request should go directly to the Judiciary Committee. They deferred maintenance on the state pen for forever and then lied to the legislature and said that it was in disarray and we need to shut it down and we need a new prison. But last year, when I brought an amendment to demolish the state pen, because if it's in such disarray and people shouldn't live there, we should demolish it as soon as you guys build this new prison. That amendment got struck down because people believe that it still should stay open, which is a blatant lie. So honestly speaking, any request that comes from the department should come to Judiciary Committee. It is only right. We're the subject matter committee for the prisons. It's no reason why judges' salary should come to Judiciary, but requests from the Department of Punitive Services should not. Can somebody please explain to me why the Department of Punitive Services requests can just go straight to appropriations, but the judges' salaries won't? How does that make sense? If you're gonna do it for the judges, you have to do it for the prisons, which is why I believe everyone in here should support this amendment. It's actually not an amendment to joke around or try to say, I gotcha or anything like that. It's actually a good amendment. I think the department should have to come before the Judiciary Committee if they request any dollar from this place, because it's ran horribly. It's been ran horribly my whole lifetime. It's still being ran horribly. We don't even have ombudsman or OIG able to go inside right now because of an attorney general's opinion, and the ombudsman wasn't even included in the opinion, but they can't even go inside. Where's the oversight? If we're not gonna have oversight, then we need to do some things in this body to ensure we have better oversight over the prisons, which is why I brought this amendment. Would Senator Wayne yield to a question?
Senator Wayne, will you yield to a question?
Yes. Senator Wayne, does it make sense that the judges' salaries go to Judiciary, but budget requests from the Department of Punitive Services does not?
No, I think we need to have a broader conversation. In fact, Senator Hansen and I brought a bill last year to require every agency to go back to its home jurisdiction for the committee every 5 years to make sure that the committee of jurisdiction over that area has a say in what their budget and what their appropriations look like. So I agree with you.
Do you think there was some questions that weren't asked to the department last year when they requested the money for the prison?
100%. The fact that appropriations allowed for a study to be done and then that study not to be done and then go ahead and fund the prison is I think, evident of why this should be in front of Judiciary.
I appreciate it. Thank you. That is the committee chair of the Judiciary Committee. If we're gonna send judges' salaries to Judiciary, the department their request should be sent to Judiciary as well. It's a 3-day committee. We have 100+ bills. We deal with many things throughout the year around the prisons. Many of us go inside the prisons all year. There is no reason why they should be requesting funds and not do their job and get to skate around the Judiciary Committee and go straight to the Appropriations Committee. It doesn't make sense. And that is why I brought this amendment. And I think everybody else in this body should support this amendment because it's putting up guardrails to make sure taxpayer dollars are spent properly. We talk about we need property tax relief and everything else every year. The way we could get that and the way we could start getting that is to ensure these agencies are spending dollars properly and efficiently and getting the job done. You're spending $300+ million for a system that is failing, and there's no return on investment at all. And they're trying to keep the old state prison open after they built this one. How does that make sense? How is that fiscally responsible? Anybody can stand up and say please stand up and tell me a system that is failing. The new prison will be overcrowded day one. and you still have an aging facility that was until last year too old to keep open, how does that make sense for taxpayers? And we keep saying, well, I don't say it, but a lot of people say it, we need property tax relief and those type of things. We're spending our money wrong. We're wasting the taxpayer dollars by not putting up proper guardrails to the Department of Punitive Services. And that's why I asked for your green vote to support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator John Kavanaugh is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I rise in support of Senator McKinney's amendment. And like a lot of things, I have mixed feelings about the underlying amendment. I do appreciate clarification as it pertains to things, but to speak specifically to Senator McKinney's amendment, we set policy through where we spend money, right? It's we all know that when we choose to spend money on something, it means that's important to us. And when we choose not to spend money on something else, we are inherently deciding which thing is more important and prioritizing it. Sometimes we disagree about what policy we should undertake as a whole, right? But there's a lot of things we all agree on that we put lower down the list than others. And some of us would like to see money spent on rehabilitation services, less carceral alternatives to the folks who are in our system, and addressing those in a more constructive way, as opposed to just building more prisons, which we've all had this conversation that just looking at the numbers, we can't build our way out of it. But that inherently how we do that is a policy decision. And the people that are equipped to decide which thing we should prioritize is the Judiciary Committee. We've already, in this rule and in this conversation, granted the premise that the Judiciary Committee is inherently different and has subject matter expertise over the courts by keeping them the judicial salaries there, which I agree with. I think that's important to make sure that those folks who do see those 100 and some bills that Senator McKinney talked about and hear all of the stories about what's going right, what's going wrong, what are the ideas out there. They get the law enforcement comes, prosecutors come, defense attorneys come, advocates who work with people who are returning from incarceration, people who are victims of crimes. The judiciary hears it all, and they see all of those things. And so they have an ability to make a determination about what is the right way to spend our money in that carceral system. So we've already established that. This is just, and actually I'd say an even more important issue for them to have that authority over. I would also point out, we all know this, that if you want to hold the administration or an agency accountable, you need to have something that they want. Because if you, as your committee has no jurisdiction over their budget and you want them to come in and explain to you why something's going wrong, they can just ignore it. And they do often. I mean, I know Senator McKinney or Senator Wayne can talk about this. I've heard that there are times when previous directors of Department of Corrections maybe didn't show up in Judiciary when we would have liked to have heard from them. But if the Judiciary Committee has oversight over their construction budget, then they certainly would be incentivized to come and answer questions and subject themselves to the jurisdiction of the committee, which is also important and will help us ensure that the system is running as well as we want it to, or as well as we can get it to be. So I agree with this for that reason as well. And the other thing is, when the budget bills come out, especially if we're making them non-divisible, which I don't necessarily disagree with making budget bills non-divisible, although I would question the wisdom of anybody dividing the question on the budget bills anyway. But it is essentially saying you have to have 25 votes to take something out. So you have to have 25 people who agree enough to eliminate something from a budget. Thank you, Mr. President. So you have to put up an amendment to do that, as opposed to the Appropriations Committee does their work, sends out a budget. If we want to take something out, you don't need everybody to agree, right? You need if it's divisible, you would need 25 people to say, yep, that's a priority to us. We want to keep it in there. So it shifts the burden in terms of who's setting that priority. And so putting it in the hands of the Judiciary Committee, putting it as a separate standalone, allows us to have that more robust conversation on this one issue, which we've had in my 3 years here, has been a serious point of conversation in the budget conversation. And so perhaps does merit a standalone construction bill that goes to a subject matter expert committee for jurisdiction and for their having their subjective or their critical eye on it, their expertise on it. So I'm in support of Senator McKinney's amendment, and I'll keep thinking on the underlying amendment myself. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Dungan's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I do rise today in support of Senator McKinney's amendment. I think we've touched on a few important things here that I want to kind of highlight and then dig a little bit deeper into. A conversation about whether or not we're going to be doing capital construction for the Department of Corrections is one that I think should always have some extra highlighted importance. It's not something we should do willy-nilly. It's something that I think we should always make sure we're focusing on. And I think that ensuring that that conversation with regard to the capital funds goes to the Judiciary Committee rather than the Appropriations Committee achieves that goal in a number of ways. One, as we've already heard from other senators, it allows subject matter experts or people who at least have been hearing these kind of conversations time and time again to have input into those requests. As Senator Wayne had pointed out, this has been a proposal I know in the past to have at least some additional oversight or additional eyes on the pieces of paper from subject matter committees when we're talking about appropriating money for major projects. And I think that building a prison or implementing additional construction in prisons or modifications is something that the Judiciary Committee has the expertise or at least the experience to be able to focus on in a way that I think would be helpful. In addition to that, I also think that it allows for a further conversation to happen regarding building things such as new prisons. When these kind of requests go through the Appropriations Committee, I know that our Appropriations Committee works incredibly hard and they do a really difficult job that I think a lot of us don't envy, but there's so many things that are on their plate when they're ultimately coming up with the mainline budget and addressing these kind of requests that I know it can be essentially overly burdensome to dig super deep into some of these issues. And I think that, part of what is helpful about having judges' salaries be separate is it allows an additional or a different committee to have a deeper conversation about that, digging deep into their background and expertise. By also ensuring that capital construction costs for the Department of Correctional Services goes to Judiciary, it achieves that same goal. It alleviates that pressure on appropriations, and it adds the additional ability for the Judiciary to have that conversation. This is part of a larger conversation, frankly, that I think we should be having as a body. I think it's a conversation we're going to have moving forward, but I'm actually very thankful that Senator McKinney raised this topic now, because if we're here and talking, I think we should be talking about issues that are affecting Nebraska. And our prison overcrowding is one of the most, if not the most pressing issue in our judicial system right now. We lead the nation in incarceration. I know it's us or Alabama, depending on how you count it. And that's a top two that I don't want Nebraska to be a part of. And it's one thing that I know most of my colleagues will acknowledge, that our incarceration is a huge problem and that we overly incarcerate. Where we disagree and where the conversation breaks down is the discussion of what do we do to address that. And I spent a great number of hours during this interim session thinking about this, talking with colleagues about this. I also spent a lot of time this interim session going into the Department of Correctional Services facilities, touring them, meeting with Director Jeffries, meeting with the parole board, and also meeting with the individuals who are incarcerated there. I spent quite a bit of time meeting with folks who have spent quite a bit of time in the Department of Correctional Services and had an opportunity to discuss with them what services have been available, what services they would like to see, and frankly, what's working and what's not. We had a long conversation last session about the difference between punishment and rehabilitation. And that is a conversation that I think we need to continue to have as a body, because what I was able to observe firsthand is in talking to a number of these people who are, thank you, Mr. President, who are incarcerated, is that when they take part in these rehabilitative services, they benefit from that. And when they benefit from that, what we ultimately have down the road are safer communities because people have actually addressed the underlying problems they're dealing with while they're in the Department of Corrections. And what I also hear is we need additional services for those rehabilitative services in custody, because right now there simply just isn't the resources or the ability to do everything for everyone who needs it. And being able to address, for example, how this new prison is going to be built and what that capital construction cost is going to be, I think would allow the Judiciary Committee and those who have expertise and experience in the matter to fully address those questions and to focus on what we need to reduce our incarceration while still increasing community safety. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. I recognize Senator Arch.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to respond to this discussion. It's a great discussion, by the way, because it impacts all committees. First of all, the capital construction bill, in normal years, I would say, I'll put it that way, the capital construction bill is a single bill that has a list of all the agencies, all the departments, and their capital requests. So it's not separate bills specific to agencies or departments, but rather it's a single bill, and that's how the capital budget. Now, I say in normal years because one off last year, I think that was folded into the mainline budget, but I say that's not the typical process for this. But I would point the legislature's attention to another rule, Rule 8, Section 4, which is on page 55 if you have your book. And it talks about standing committee appropriations review, and it's Section A. Each standing committee may hold a budget request review hearing on the agency, board, and commission budgets reasonably encompassed in its subject matter jurisdiction. Any such review hearing shall not be held until the Appropriations Committee has held its public hearing on that agency, board, or commission. The chairperson of the standing committee shall coordinate the scheduling of such hearings with the chairperson of the Appropriations Committee. The standing committee shall obtain a determination from the executive board that the budget to be reviewed is within its subject matter jurisdiction. The standing committee may recommend to the legislature amendments to proposed appropriations. So what Senator McKinney is pointing out is very appropriate. There is a large issue with regards to the construction of a prison, and that would be very much within jurisdiction of Judiciary Committee. And so the committee can request a review of that budget and make recommendations to the legislature for amendments to that budget. But this could apply to any committee in the legislature. And I mention this because chairs, please be alert. There is an opportunity for you as a chair within your subject matter jurisdiction to have a review of a particular large budget item, for instance, after the Appropriations Committee has heard that. And I draw myself back to the YRTCs in Kearney. When I chaired the special committee oversight of that YRTC situation in Kearney, one of the conclusions of that was we need to construct different living units out at that Kearney campus. With that, we could have, as the HHS chair, could have asked for a separate hearing in HHS. However, that committee was already very much involved, and so it was unnecessary to do that, but that would have been another example. So it's not just Judiciary that may have some of these issues, but there could be other committees as well. So I say that to say I don't support the amendment, but I do support his concern that those kinds of things can and should be brought to the committee of subject matter jurisdiction, in this case, the construction of prison, to the Judiciary Committee, but we have a rule that already allows for that and provides for that, the process. So I don't support the amendment, but I certainly understand where Senator McKinney is coming from and his concern on this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Arch. Senator Wayne, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I do support Senator McKinney's amendment. I think this is also around a broader discussion that the exec board should be having around committees of jurisdiction. I looked this year at I was just looking online and seeing the number of appropriation requests that I believe deal with programmatic changes. These are program changes. when you decide you're going to move money, say funding this and then deciding to fund that and change the requirements of those funding streams or change what they're eligible for, that is a program change. And that program change should go to the home jurisdiction of where that lies. If it's rural workforce housing, it should probably go to government. It should not stay in appropriations. And I think that needs to happen. And I think this year, in fact, I'm going to be sending some letters to exec board re-requesting where bills go if they are program changes inside of appropriations. Too many times we are doing program changes inside of appropriations and inside of our budget. And that's not where it's supposed to happen. That's not where those hearings are supposed to occur. If you're talking about program changes, the what's being eligible for funding and what's being changed, that should go to the jurisdiction of that committee. That means there'll be more bills in government, more bills in urban affairs, more bills in judiciary, but that also means there'll be less bills in appropriation. We have too many program changes going into appropriations, and that's one thing we should take a closer look at, especially the exec board. The second thing is, when it comes to corrections and judiciary, I just find it ironic that they never actually show up in judiciary, but they show up in appropriations. So based off of the rule that he just quoted, Speaker Arch, I will be setting a corrections hearing within the next week and a half, and we'll talk about the construction of the prison. And if they don't show up, maybe we can convict the exec board to issue subpoenas at this point. Like, this is ridiculous that we are building a new prison that is going to be full the first day, and there's no actual plans. Now, I've heard of individual senators, including myself, talk to the new corrections director, and there's some good ideas. But again, those ideas should not go in front of appropriations for funding. They should be changed legislatively through the process. We shouldn't just say we're going to add a new program and give them another $2 million. There should be a full detail in judiciary of what those programs currently are, what they're trying to change, and whether we think that's a good change or not. That is not an appropriations decision. As much as I like appropriations, they're not the expert in what's going on in reentry and all the other bills that are dealing with this issue. So in order to step back and look at the whole board and change things, there has to be a committee that's actually working on these things. And appropriations is dealing with 80 agencies. How many agencies? 75 agencies. Corrections is just one of them. HHS committee should be taking on a larger role when it comes to HHS and their programming. They're the experts, not just one hearing in front of the committee and appropriations asking for funding. Because it puts appropriations at a disservice. They don't understand all the programming going on in corrections. They don't understand what's happening in our prison population. They only hear that from a little bit on the floor and what we kind of talk about if there's a briefing on it. But we blindly said, go ahead and build a new prison. What if we could put half of the prison population who is already, not half, but a lot of prison, the population, about over 1,000, I think 300, who are actually community corrections back in the community. That would eliminate the need for a new prison. It would actually provide jobs and actually provide workers for people who are looking for jobs, such as Norfolk, such as Alliance, Scottsbluff. I can keep going on where they are looking for people to work and they can't get people, but we have people going back to those communities that have jammed out without any skill sets. That's not an appropriations call. That is a judiciary committee call. And that's where appropriations and these chairs going down in the future have to do a better line of looking at budget requests and understanding if you really understand the complexities of that agency or that issue. And again, it's not a knock on appropriations. I think it does a disservice to the actual overall product that we produce simply because the agency is not getting the in-depth questions and conversations that would have at a hearing. Thank you, Mr. President.
Recognize Senator Frederickson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I rise today, I believe, in support of Senator McKinney's amendment, and I appreciate him bringing this, and I appreciate both he and Senator Wayne's perspective on this. I tend to agree. I think that the Judiciary Committee is well suited to making decisions on Department of Corrections and appropriations related to the Department of Corrections, given their level of expertise. One thing I've really admired about the Judiciary Committee is the thoughtfulness of the committee on whenever I've been in there presenting bills, and appreciate that. I do want to also go back to the underlying proposed rule change number 19 by Speaker Arch. My colleague, Senator John Kavanaugh, was presented some questions a bit earlier about the visibility of the budget and was kind of questioning whether or not it's wise to ever divide the budget per se. So that got me thinking a little bit more on whether that would make any sense if that would ever occur. And I think it's obviously usual and customary practice not to divide the budget. And of course, as all of us know in here, we have a constitutional obligation to pass the budget. However, it's also, I think, really worth noting and underscoring that some of the cash reserves transfers that happen with the budget involve very large public appropriations. And we could be doing a disservice to ourselves by limiting or striking outright our ability to divide out and consider specific portions individually. I think a recent example of this was the Lake project, the Star Wars project. In LB 1011 from fiscal year 22-23, we appropriated $1 million of cash funds to study the safety and sustainability of the project. And as we've seen in recent experts and water experts, for example, have come out publicly talking about and cautioning against building on specifically a floodplain. And so, this is an example where it might be prudent of us to be able to divide the budget if there are specific things that are going into the budget that might go against the best interests of Nebraskans and specifically the safety of Nebraskans. If we are doing something that could compromise our land and also the private property that people live on, it might be incumbent upon us to, instead of just voting for the omnibus budget or voting for the whole budget, to be able to carve out and make actual decisions individually on things that could have significant impact. So I'm still kind of considering and thinking about this a little bit more about whether it makes sense to fully outright strike our ability to do that. I do think it's obviously usual and customary not to divide the budget, and that's usually best practices, but I think there certainly can be exceptions as cited in the example I just gave. So I'll continue to listen to the debate on this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Frederickson. Recognize Senator Clements.
Thank you, Mr. President. As the Chair of Appropriations, I am not in favor of the McKinney Amendment. And as Senator Wayne said, we have 75 state agencies that we review their budgets. Many of them have capital construction requests. All of those affect our cash reserve fund, which has statutory guidelines for the amount that's budgeted out of the cash reserve so that we don't get the reserve down too far. Some examples of things we've seen are the Perkins Canal Project, over $500 million. Game and Parks, they have buildings that they need to build in different places and rehab. Department of Transportation, they have maintenance buildings that are replaced that we approve. They probably will be coming asking for more snow plows. We've had snow plow requests from them, and I expect that again. And I thank you, Department of Transportation, for all your snow plow drivers and keeping the roads open. The heating and air HVAC project here in the Capitol building was over $80 million project. That was also something we in appropriations approved. So sending just one agency to a different committee, budget and keeping the cash reserve in line with what we want to have. And also it would create extra work for appropriations, not less, as Senator Wayne suggested. And I appreciated Speaker Arch talking about Rule 8, Section 4, which already addresses this. And I'm certainly willing to work with another committee that would want to have a review of a project. That's not a problem with me. It does say in the rule that appropriations would need to have considered the request first so that we are fitting it within the budget. But if there are suggestions on design or programming, as they're mentioning, I agree that would be appropriate for a review with another committee. So I do oppose this amendment. I think it's been addressed already in the rules. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clements. Recognize Senator McKinney.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise again in support of this amendment for reasons I stated prior. The honest truth is, if we don't have any policy changes over the next year or so around our criminal justice system, the prison that you guys voted for last year will be overcrowded day one. That is a fact that cannot be denied, which means we're going to have more requests from the Nebraska Department of Punitive Services to expand that prison and probably to keep NSP open, which until last spring, it was in such bad shape that it couldn't stay open, and why people voted to build the prison. They should not be allowed to just get around not following the law, because why the ombudsman is not allowed inside the prisons is against the law. They're not even included in the AG's opinion, and the AG's opinion is just an AG's opinion. The ombudsman should still be allowed to go inside the prisons. There's millions of issues going on right now that are not being addressed because the state and this body won't stand up to the executive branch. It is also fiscally irresponsible not to have the department come before the Judiciary Committee. Would Senator Clements yield to a question?
Senator Clements, will you yield to a question?
Yes.
Thank you. Senator Clements, when the department came before you and the request for the prison, did you have an in-depth conversation about when, why, were they, when and why the facility study wasn't completed, and when was it going to be completed?
Not in-depth, no. We talked about the additional space for programming. We didn't get into details of that, though.
When you talked about programming, did you talk about specific programming that was needed to alleviate the issues around programming, or did you just talk about space?
I talked about issues because the current facilities don't accommodate enough programming, and that they're wanting to expand that, but we didn't get into individual programs that they were going to propose.
And last question, when they come back before us, probably in a year, and ask for a request for funding, most likely to keep NSP open, do you think you'll probably support that?
I'll have to review the request when it comes. I couldn't commit to that today.
All right, thank you. And back to Rule 8, Section 4, I believe it should read, any such review hearing shall not be held until the Judiciary Committee held its public hearing on that agency, board, or commission. And we could work around the language of an exception around that, but there's no reason why the department shouldn't have to go before the Judiciary Committee first, so we can ask the questions about what is needed, what is not being done. And instead, they're going in front of the Appropriations Committee and just getting a blank check to just do nothing, do no good, not help people out, no rehabilitation. You said time? Oh, 1 minute. So I personally believe the Appropriations Committee should be last. They should have to answer tough questions instead of getting a blank check and then saying, hey, the Appropriations Committee just granted us millions of dollars. We really don't need to come talk to you no more, because no matter what you ask or what you feel like we haven't done, we got the money to do what we want. That is backwards. That is completely backwards. And that's why this amendment should be passed. It should not be the Appropriations Committee first. It should be the Committee of Jurisdiction. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Recognize Senator John Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, again, I rise in support of this amendment, and I appreciate everyone's comments. And when Senator Wayne pointed out, which is what I was talking about earlier, that the agency heads don't subject themselves to the questioning of the committee. And I did want to talk a little bit about, I was talking earlier about the divisibility of the question. And I guess I do like this rule about the non-divisibility, because I was thinking back, and I know that Senator Frederickson talked about this, when you put up an amendment that allows for the conversation to happen on that particular subject. But if you divide the question, then it's just on whatever section you're on, and it's not amendable. And so I could see if we allow divisibility, it might allow gaming of the system and never allow for an actual conversation for the amendments like mine on the canal last year, or Senator McKinney's on the construction last year, if we divided the question and it got ordered in such a way as to never have that conversation. So I do think that might be strike the right balance. But I did want to kind of expand the conversation that since we did bring up Rule 8, Section 4, I guess I'll just, while we're having this conversation, and one of the reasons we have the conversation is to say, what is the best mechanism to effectuate this? And as Senator McKinney was talking, I thought, what if we, rather than the proposal that we have now, amended Section 4 to say, if the standing committee holds this hearing that they're entitled to hold, and the agency doesn't come and testify about their budget to that committee, then that section would automatically be withheld from the appropriations bill. I don't know if that's the right idea. It just seems like we need to put, if we're relying on, if we're saying, no, this needs to go to appropriations, shouldn't go to the subject matter experts, which, as I said earlier, we've already conceded about judiciary salaries. If we're saying appropriations is the appropriate place for the construction budgets for the prisons, then we need to put some kind of stick in the rule that we're relying upon. If we're saying, no, judiciary has the authority to bring them in and have them answer for it and subject them to this, and to put up an amendment to the budget. I think we need to actually give some teeth to that. We need to put something in there and say, if the budget, if that department doesn't come and subject itself, then automatically whatever the proposal of the committee, subject matter committee, would supplant the amendment. I don't know. I'm brainstorming here, so I don't know if this is the right idea, but that was what I was thinking of. So we're talking about this, is that we have the subject matter experts. They have all of this experience, but they don't have enough power to actually hold our agencies accountable. And we see the biggest problems in how our agencies operate. Some of them doing a great job, some, like all things in life, some are better than others, and different people, do a different job. But when we've had mistakes, it's because of sort of the isolation and entrenchment and lack of oversight from this body of those agencies. And it's really important that we do flex our muscle as a separate entity. And like all things, we set policy for the state, we pass laws, and then things go out into the agencies and they implement them in their interpretation. The other power we have, besides passing laws, is the power of the purse, which is we say, if we don't like what you're doing, we can take money away from you and give it to somebody else to do. We can put it into a different program, or we can just cut your budget and say, if you're not doing it, thank you, Mr. President, if you're not doing it right, then we aren't going to fund what you're asking for. And that gets people's attention, gets them to come and subject themselves to answer questions, to be accountable. And that is one of our fundamental obligations in this legislature, is to hold the agencies, departments, the executive accountable and make sure they're actually doing what we set in policy, what we're appropriating the funds for, and what the intentions are. So I think this is a reason that we're talking about this as a set aside is it is a particularly important thing that's happening in our state. It's going to continue in an ongoing in our state, as Senator McKinney correctly pointed out, that this is not the end of construction requests for dollars from the Department of Corrections. And it's really important that we make sure we are holding them accountable and that they're doing the best work that they can. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Duncan, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise again in support of Senator McKinney's amendment. I understand that when you're dealing with rules and modifications to the rules, it can be a little, I think, scary, or there can be a little bit of hesitance with regards to modifying them with amendments. But I think that this is an important enough conversation to have that my colleagues should consider supporting this. One of the things that I was also noting in this debate is it sounded like Senator Clements, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, said that he did oppose this amendment, but that he was open at least to the possibility of other kind of budgetary requests pertaining to programming or other kind of things that are going on in the DCS facilities to have input or hearings by other committees. So that kind of got me thinking about other options we would have available to us, because we don't have to just do things the way we've always done them. There is a history and a tradition in this body for having joint hearings on certain issues. For example, the Revenue Committee and the Appropriations Committee get together every biennium, I believe, to approve or to come up with sort of the outlook for fiscal years on the out years. That's a historical precedent we've had now for some time. So I started thinking about the possibility of joint hearings, and I was speaking with some other senators about this, and it would maybe make sense to have a joint hearing between the Appropriations Committee and the Judiciary Committee when having conversations pertaining to funding for DCS. I understand that the Appropriations Committee has a lot of plates spinning at once, and certainly I know they don't want to have a bill approved or not approved that would sort of change their ongoing math, because I know that there's a lot of things they're sort of balancing in those books. But again, having the input of the judiciary on these conversations and being able to have individuals who have heard and talked about these issues time and time again to ask questions of, for example, the Department of Correctional Services when they come in and propose these capital construction costs. And in asking those questions can highlight a lot of the things that we've discussed here today. What is the focus going to be on beds that can accommodate mental health services? What is the focus going to be in your construction with regards to the ability to have substance use disorder treatment? What is the ability in your facility to facilitate additional programming as you try to incorporate more rehabilitative services? And I think asking those questions with the background of knowing sort of where we are and how we got here can add some benefit to the hearing and trying to determine what exactly you're trying to glean out of the conversation. I believe that our current director of Department of Correctional Services is very open to collaboration, is working to sort of come up with some good solutions moving forward to decrease our bed populations. But I think that when those conversations are happening about funding, having the judiciary be there, even in a joint hearing capacity, would be really interesting to have that input. I also wanted to comment briefly about the underlying rule change in and of itself. I will say I share some of the hesitancy, I suppose, about the modifications. I don't necessarily oppose it because I do know that in practice, the division of the question on appropriations bills or budget bills rather is not allowed in most circumstances and certainly not practicable, just given how many individual different pieces would have to be split apart and worked through prior to the conclusion of the debate. But I do also understand that, again, for the guardrails that are being put in place to keep the legislature operating in the way that it should, where the speaker came from with this conversation. So I do think that the proposed rule change 19, still delineating judges' salaries going to the judiciary, is important. I appreciate that separation. I think early on, that was a part of the conversation that had happened. And I appreciate Speaker Arch being open to, thank you, Mr. President, separating out the judges' salaries. But I do think that Senator McKinney and others have now raised an additional question of what else could be seen or heard, or at least have input from other committees. And I think that capital construction from DCS certainly as a concept makes sense. So I'm still listening to the conversation. I know we have a few more people in the queue, so I'm curious to see if there's any other issues that are raised, but I appreciate us having this debate here today. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. I recognize Senator Conrad.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I am intrigued by my friend Senator McKinney's amendment to the proposed rule change that Speaker Arch has put forward in regards to our budgetary process. And I had the opportunity to share some different perspectives on how that interfaced with our budget deliberations in general. And as I'm keeping an open mind to what Senator McKinney is trying to do here, I think very admirably, I did want to echo a point that is made by Speaker Arch earlier and refer the body to both Rule 3, Section 1B, which gives additional authority for standing committees to take up budget-related matters, and then, of course, Rule 8, Section 4, that outlines a sense of perhaps concurrent jurisdiction for appropriations and standing committees that Speaker Arch had already mentioned. So in many ways, I think that Senator McKinney's proposal is in clear alignment with a more collaborative instead of siloed approach between the subject matter jurisdiction committees and the appropriations process. I would also like to note that it may be important to give a distinctive treatment to the budget of correctional services for a host of different reasons. One, if you look at the data and the information, the Department of Correctional Services, their budget has grown at a faster rate than education, than human services, than other core functions of government, and not just by a little bit, but by a significant amount. So we've seen an incredible explosion in funding for the Department of Correctional Services on the state level and, of course, on the county level and federal level as well. But there may be a need to have a distinctive treatment for this budget, which is out of control and which is facilitating an ongoing issue where we're taxing our citizens to death to foster mass incarceration and racial injustice. And this is precisely why there is an ever-growing effort across the political spectrum to address smart criminal justice reform, because it ties our hands and our ability because of not only the human impact, but the fiscal impact in advancing investments in education or human services or infrastructure. So we see this playing out on the local level, which puts extraordinary pressure on property taxes. We see this playing out on the state level as we see less and less money going to things like higher education, for example, and more money going to prisons and building prisons. Without any sort of focus on programs, services, rehabilitation, or smart justice policy. So at some point, we are going to have to grapple with this. And we heard very clearly last year, until smart justice reform happens, it's not building one new massive prison, it's building two. And it's critical that we continue our efforts, both from a fiscal perspective and a policy perspective, to bring smart justice reforms to Nebraska. Additionally, this goes to, I think, some other very important issues in regards to legislative oversight and checks and balances. Thank you, Mr. President. And particularly now, more than ever, due to the Attorney General's guided effort to call into question our ability to conduct legislative oversight. For the first time in over 50 years, our ombudsman's offices are not in the prisons. We do not have eyes and ears there to see what is happening from a systemic perspective or in acute and important cases. So therefore, we must explore ways to address that from a legislative perspective. And I think legislative oversight on our prison system is requisite now more than ever without those other tools that are available. So I commend Senator McKinney for bringing forward additional creative solutions to ensure oversight and accountability of our most troubled institutions, which has a history of fleecing taxpayers and harming individuals. Thank you, Mr. President.
Recognize Senator Michaela Cavanaugh.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I'm glad the word got out that I really like chocolate. Everybody's been dropping off chocolate that is sitting at their desks. But thank you. We're definitely keeping it under the $50 gift limit today. Don't worry, folks. I rise in support of Senator McKinney's amendment, and I wondered if Senator Clements would yield to a question. I wonder if Senator Clements would yield to a question.
Senator Clements, will you yield to a question?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Clements. So I was reading over the rule, and it says that part of it is the capital construction goes to appropriations, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so the last year, I think it was, or maybe it was the year before, we appropriated money for the YRTC Kearney to do a capital construction, correct?
Yes.
And has the Appropriations Committee provided any oversight over that project?
No, we have not.
Do you think it's your role to provide oversight over that project?
No.
Okay, thank you, Senator Clements. I would agree, it probably isn't your role. I mean, other than being a senator, so we all have that role, but as a member of the Appropriations Committee and a bill going to appropriations, that's not your role. But within the HHS committee, we had actually created a special oversight committee into the YRTCs, specifically because of facility problems. And so I believe it, and I think that the committee, at least in my first several years, believed that it was very much our responsibility to provide oversight over those facilities. And I would like to let you all know that when Senator Day and I traveled to the YRTC Kearney in early November, they had gutted the buildings that we had given them the money to gut and renovate, and they had done nothing else, and they are sitting on it. Now, the YRTC itself is not sitting on it, DAS is sitting on it. In the meantime, we are struggling in that same facility to have any oversight unless one of us can go there, because the governor has decided to completely ignore the laws of this state and take an opinion as law, which is not actually how the law works. So if you were to go to the YRTC Kearney, you would see that the young men that are at that facility are still in an open dorm style. We have a large number of youth there that have interrelational conflicts that are very serious and very violent, and there is very unsuitable housing for them that makes it unsafe for the young men that are there, and it also makes it unsafe for the staff. And there's an increase of incidences in abuse of the staff, and there's an increase of incidences of abuse of the youth that are there, and there is no oversight. And the facility that the Appropriations Committee gave money to, I think around $20 million, is not getting oversight by the Appropriations Committee, because it is not the role of the Appropriations Committee to provide oversight of all of the capital construction that they approve. But we do have committees that have jurisdiction over these different things. We have a Judiciary Committee that has jurisdiction over correctional facilities. We have an HHS committee that has jurisdiction over HHS facilities. And since I have been in this legislature, I have taken numerous tours of HHS facilities from the very first year. And at times, it has been a collaborative effort between judiciary and HHS. My freshman year, Senator Sarah Howard and Senator Steve Lathrop took us all. We went to the Lincoln Correctional Facilities. We went to the YRTC facilities. We did oversight because that is the job of those committees to do oversight. So it makes perfect sense to me to adopt Senator McKinney's amendment. And I think it should make perfect sense to everyone on the Appropriations Committee to do so as well, unless they want to start taking up that mantle. So unless the Appropriations Committee is willing to start traveling to these facilities throughout the state and provide oversight on behalf of this body, I think that they should be voting for Senator McKinney's amendment. I have less than a minute left, so I will yield the remainder of my time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator McKinney, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm sure Senator Kavanaugh and a lot of families and a lot of juveniles in the state's care would describe the department as the Department of Hell and Harm. But looking at Rule 3, Section B, and that paragraph that Senator Conrad mentioned, a committee's particular jurisdiction shall also include review of the budgets of agencies, boards, and commissions reasonably encompassed in its subject matter jurisdiction. That has never happened since I've been here. So we're not even following our rules. So either Judiciary and Appropriations needs to have joint hearings when they ask for these requests, or you support my amendment because that last piece of that section has never happened. But would Senator Blood yield to some questions?
Senator Blood, will you yield to a question?
Yes.
Thank you. Senator Blood, you have some experience working in the prisons, and I wanted to ask you if the Department of Punitive Services came before the Judiciary Committee and requested $350 million for a new prison and money for programming, what type of questions would you have asked?
Oh gosh, good question. And I'm not sure I can do it in this amount of time. So based on working for the prison system for almost 7 years, I would want to know what was and was not working with what we have, with our current system, before we want to go ahead and build out and try something new. And so one of the things I saw both when I worked there and many of the reports that we've received year after year is that they aren't always doing a really good job of identifying the inmates' criminogenic needs. In other words, what are they doing to make sure that they start the reentry process on the very first day of incarceration, as opposed to just warehousing people, which we know has what's been happening. So that would apply to things like criminal history, sorry, it's a long answer, substance abuse, educational level, had they had any childhood victimization. And we need to know these things because if they're coming to us for more money for programming, that's the next piece of that puzzle. So are we able to offer them job skills that will actually allow them to get a job upon reentry? Evidence-based programming that helps reduce recidivism, because we're not spending tax dollars wisely if it's a revolving door. Mental health, always mental health, substance abuse, family ties. I'm not seeing really good programming for family ties. And I want to know if a facility is not able to serve supposedly the state any longer, that they're definitely going to shut it down if we're allowing them to have funds for a new prison. And that was never really clear to me, and it's really unfortunate they didn't get in front of us. And then of course we want to talk about reducing restrictive access and solitary confinement. And then once they're out, the halfway houses and community resources, what can we do better? So we tend to blindly fund things in Nebraska, or we do knee-jerk reactions when there's a crisis like what happened at Tecumseh. And we never really solve the problems. We just kind of put a Band-Aid on it. So those are some of the questions I would ask is like, what are they doing to make it better before I give them money to try and make it better?
Thank you, and I appreciate that, and that's where I'm getting to with this amendment. There are questions that need to be answered before you write a check to the Department of Punitive Services. If they come one year and say we need 10 million, we give it to them, and then the next year they say we need another 10, shouldn't we ask, how was that other 10 used? Did it accomplish anything positive? That's what I'm talking about here. We shouldn't just be giving them a blank check, and we're obviously not following our rules because they have never come before the Judiciary Committee and answered these questions on budget requests. So if y'all don't want to support this, I suggest the Appropriations Committee supports Judiciary and Appropriations at the same time in a joint hearing when they come before the committee. Either support this or support that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator Conrad is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I know there are an additional host of creative solutions to try and foster more collaboration across the subject matter jurisdictions committee and the appropriations committee that are happening. So really, again, want to thank Senator McKinney for lifting this issue and idea, because it has prompted not only good debate, but a lot of collaborative discussion off the mic as well, which is appropriate and constructive. I also wanted to lift a few recent examples about the perhaps need for additional sunlight, additional transparency, additional attention to be paid upon our troubled Department of Corrections. Let me provide a few recent examples. Of course, we have a fair amount of information and data that has been provided through special reports and annual reports by our inspector generals until this year, due to the Attorney General's misguided weaponization and politicization of his ability to issue legal opinions, which the administration has seized to thwart current law regarding oversight. Nevertheless, we do have their reports and recommendations from recent years which show ongoing pattern and practice of potential human rights issues, of issues related to frontline staff, including their safety and their work environment. We also have a fairly recent report that has been put forward, I believe penned by State Auditor Foley, that shows that the Department of Corrections has a significant amount of questions in play for the utilization of over $20 million in ARPA funds, which should be grabbing a lot more headlines than it is. And this was just literally within the last weeks that report from Auditor Foley came to light and shows the additional mismanagement in our Department of Corrections. The other thing that I wanted to let people know about was, in addition to this solution-oriented approach to ensure better collaboration, the existing collaboration afforded for in our rules between subject matter committees and the Appropriations Committee, there is also the rare but possible opportunities wherein senators themselves go testify on budgetary matters or hearings. That is rarely utilized in our practice, but it is something that perhaps is also available if this measure does not move forward, that I wanted to lift as a potential solution or remedy that would not require a rules change. Additionally, you may remember how these issues play out in very, very recent years. Without a more robust collaboration between judiciary and appropriations on issues like smart criminal justice reform that have a significant fiscal impact and, of course, human impact as well. You saw, for example, after a very extensive, thoughtful process between all branches of government to put forward a roadmap for smart justice reforms that have worked in our sister states, including red states, to help save taxpayer dollars and update our criminal justice laws. Thank you, Mr. President. Those were put forward, and then Senator Suzanne Geist led a filibuster to undercut those smart justice efforts, which then led to efforts by Senator Lathrop to take significant deliberation and debate on the state budget because of how those policy issues were interlinked and interconnected. So perhaps having a more collaborative approach rather than having just those methods and solutions available may be better. And I do want to note how important it is that we do have more opportunities for a collaborative approach. As the Attorney General Office worked last year with Senator Wayne and Senator McKinney admirably to try and advance modest but meaningful smart justice reforms, then they turned around and sued the legislature over it. So we're going to need to improve our methods of oversight. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think this is a really important and fascinating conversation that I wasn't really expecting, but I'm happy that we're having it because I'll be honest, I hadn't paid that close of attention to this particular rules change. And now that I'm kind of keying into the rules debate on this change, I'm like, oh, okay. I knew one of the big things was about the judges' salaries because we've had that fight numerous times during the appropriations bill on the floor. And so I think that that is, an interesting thing to have changed here or stated here in the rules. But the part about capital construction, I'm very thankful to Senator McKinney for bringing this forward because it does raise the question of how we're supposed to be providing oversight. And just put a pin in it for a moment, the issue of the OIG and our authority that we delegate or et cetera. We are tasked with oversight, and it is the entire body's responsibility to provide oversight of tax dollars that we are appropriating and voting for and putting out into the universe. But that's a lot of work to expect each and every single senator to do. And that's part of the reason that we have this whole committee structure to begin with about legislation, policy, and money in and money out. So for me, it makes a lot of sense to look at how we are appropriating dollars and sending them out and what things are going to require a higher level of oversight. And I think when we are talking about keeping people in an incarcerated situation, whether it be a youth rehabilitation treatment center or a psychiatric center or a drug rehabilitation center or a correctional center, we have a responsibility even more so because we're not just spending taxpayer dollars, we are also charged with the care of those individuals, whoever they may be. And it is a lot to expect of a committee that is tasked with multi-billion-dollar budget to keep oversight of every single thing that the state spends money on. So for me, this makes an enormous amount of sense to make this additional change, to add that it is the role of the Judiciary Committee to provide this crucial oversight. And I think it would even make more sense to add HHS Committee for facilities within our purview. I'm not going to bring that amendment because I'm new to this conversation, but it's something that we could probably discuss for the 2025 rules updates next year. So I encourage you all to look at this proposed change very seriously and consider how we can provide good governance even better. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Vargas, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. My only 2 cents here is, one, I do appreciate Senator McKinney for bringing this. I think in the past, the struggles that we have had has been the Department of Corrections has come into appropriations, and we've asked them questions in regards to policy that they're bringing to judiciary, and we don't get the answers typically that we need. I'm not necessarily in support of this proposal because I do think that there's a responsibility in the Appropriations Committee to be making funding decisions in regards to capital construction. But I do think that accountability and the transparency with what is communicated to appropriations should also happen to judiciary. And so I know that there's at least a conversation, if not an amendment, that will bring some requirement or the ability for an ex officio member or members from the Judiciary Committee, either chairs and additional individuals, to come to a hearing where basically the head of corrections would have to answer these questions and won't be able to not answer the questions in judiciary that are being asked by several members of the committee, including Senator McKinney and others, and Senator Wayne. And I think that process is important because if there are not answers being actually given in regards to some of the policy changes or capacity that has been brought up, that makes our life harder. Because one of the things that is true in conversations in the past, we typically have conversations with judiciary about informing, what we do in appropriations. But we do deal with just the capital construction side and whether or not we are or not funding something and to what extent. But I do think it's important for judiciary, especially the chair and other members, to be involved in that. So my hope is that something, either an amendment will be brought that will enable that, and that corrections is listening and will follow suit. And I think that's the most important thing we can do to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Vargas. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator McKinney to close.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I call for a call of the House.
It's been a request for the call of the House. All members in favor of calling the House vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
22 ayes, 2 nays to go into call, Mr. President.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senator McKinney, the clock is running. You're recognized to close.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it. Colleagues, I didn't bring this amendment just to waste time. I brought this amendment because I think it's something we should do. The Department of Punitive Services shouldn't be writing blank checks, skipping the line, and going to appropriations and not doing their job. We literally have one of the worst, if not the worst, prison systems in the country and in the world. You cannot blindly ignore that. They shouldn't be given blank checks. They should have to come answer tough questions and be fiscally responsible to Nebraska taxpayers. We have conversations about property tax relief, where there's going to be conversations about raising sales taxes. How about we hold them accountable and they don't get $350 million to do nothing? There is no rehabilitation happening right now. It's not, and that's a pure fact. Yes, there's some that are able to take advantage of some opportunities, but it should be way more. Our prison system is horrible, and it's been horrible, and we haven't held them accountable because we keep writing blank checks. They should be forced to come before the Judiciary Committee and explain clearly why they want more money to do nothing. I see nothing wrong with that. And then later on this session, people are going to stand up and say we should think about the taxpayers. We should think about the money we're spending down here. But then vote against this. You shouldn't vote against this if you really care about your constituents and the taxpayers. If you really want property tax relief, this is something you should support. This is fiscally responsible, holding them accountable to the dollars that we spend. You voted for a prison. Let's make sure they do it right. I don't think we should be building a prison. I think there are some policy changes that are needed as well, because that prison that you decided to build is going to be overcrowded day one. And that is a pure fact. We have multiple issues inside of all our institutions. The York Women Prison has problems with water. Those women can't even drink the water or shower with the water or wash their hair every day with the water because the water is so horrible. But you want to write them a blank check. They should have to answer that question. The individuals inside of our prison institutions are still human at the end of the day. No matter if you think they are a criminal and they did their time and they did the crime and they should do their time, they are still human. And a lot of y'all are human as well. So let's have some humanity in this place. We do a lot of bad things in this world. Can we please have some humanity? And I would advise you all to support this amendment because I think it's the right thing to do to hold the Department of Punitive Services accountable to the legislature. Thank you. Roll call vote, reverse order.
Senator, you've heard the close. The motion before the body is shall the amendment to the proposed rule change, Rule 7, Section 3, be adopted. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Senator Wishart. Not voting. Senator Wayne. Voting yes. Senator Walls. Voting yes. Senator Von Gillern.
No.
Voting no. Senator Vargas. Voting no. Senator Slama. Voting no. Senator Sanders. Voting no. Senator Reapy. Voting yes. Senator Raybold. Voting yes. Senator Merman. Voting no. Senator Moser. Voting no. Senator Meyer. Voting no. Senator McKinney. Voting yes. Senator McDonald. Voting no. Senator Lowe. Voting no. Senator Lippincott. Voting no. Senator Linehan. Voting no. Senator Kauth. Voting no. Senator Jacobson. Voting no. Senator Hybach. Voting no. Senator Hunt. Senator Hughes. Senator Holdcroft. Voting no. Senator Hardin. Voting no. Senator Hansen. Voting no. Senator Halloran. Voting no. Senator Frederickson. Voting yes. Senator Erdman. Voting no. Senator Duncan. Voting yes. Senator Dover. Voting no. Senator Dorn. Voting no. Senator Decay. Voting no. Senator DeBoer. Voting yes. Senator Day. Voting yes. Senator Conrad. Voting yes. Senator Clements. Voting no. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Voting yes. Senator John Kavanaugh. Voting yes. Senator Brewer. Voting no. Senator Brandt. Voting no. Senator Bostoman. Voting no. Senator Bostar. Not voting. Senator Bosson. Voting Senator Bosson. Voting no. Senator Blood. Voting yes. Senator Ballard. Voting no, Senator Armendariz. Voting no, Senator Arch. Voting no, Senator Albright. Voting no, Senator Aguilar. Voting no. Vote is 13 nays, 32 nays, Mr. President.
The amendment is not adopted. I raise the call. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, next item on the bill, or excuse me, on the proposed rule change. Senator Wisher would move to amend proposed rule change 19 by adding the following language. New subsection on Rule 8, Section 4, Standing Committee Chairperson as ex officio member. The chairperson of a standing committee or a designee of the standing committee chairperson may serve as an ex officio member of the Appropriations Committee during hearings for review of state agency, board, and commission budget requests when those agencies, boards, or commissions are regionally encompassed in the standing committee's subject matter jurisdiction. That rule change will be distributed to members.
Senator Wisher to open.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I have been listening closely to the debate this morning, and as a member of Appropriations Committee, thinking about how we can address some of the concerns that I'm hearing from members on the floor, in particular around the Department of Corrections, but there have been examples in other subject matter committees as well. And so in listening to the different positions and in talking with some of my colleagues on Appropriations Committee, with the Speaker and the Clerk and Senator McKinney, brought this amendment forward as a opportunity to try and see if we can address some of the underlying issues of those who are on sort of a subject matter expertise committee. So we take Judiciary Committee, being able to have either the chair or an appointed member sitting as an ex officio, so this would be a non-voting position, but sit in an Appropriations Committee hearing that deals with their subject matter. And this is why I see there's a benefit for both that committee, that subject matter committee, and the Appropriations Committee. For the subject matter committee, they have the opportunity then to ask some tough questions of the agency that comes into us from the perspective of sort of the policy goals that are coming out of that committee, but also get to hear the appropriations perspective and discussion around the budget constraints and our sort of budget process for addressing how we fund these different areas of government. And for the Appropriations Committee, there's a huge learning benefit for having a subject matter expertise sitting in an ex officio capacity in that committee so that we can hear those tough questions. We can have those important dialogues over public record to better understand and remove any silos that exist in the legislature in terms of how we're funding different priorities and what are some of the concerns that are occurring. And in this case in particular around our correctional facility and in the building of a new penitentiary. So colleagues, I hope you will consider voting in support of this amendment. I think it will offer an opportunity for us to improve our process and for us to remove some of the silos that may exist in the legislature, and from that then have some better policy that comes out of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. Mr. Clerk, for new bills and items.
Legislative Bill 1328, offered by Senator Merman. It's a bill for an act relating to schools, to change provision relating to classification of school districts, to harmonize provisions, repeal the original sections. 1329 by Senator Merman is a bill to change provisions relating to an award of a student attending a community college, state college, private college, or the University of Nebraska under the Act, provide definitions, to harmonize provisions, repeal the original sections. 1330 by Senator Merman. It's a bill for an act relating to public education institutions, define terms, prohibit public educational institutions from taking certain actions relating to diversity, equity, and inclusion, provide for injunctive relief. 1331 by Senator Merman is a bill for an act relating to education, to redefine terms, change provisions, terminology, duties and penalties related to truancy and attendance, change powers and duties related to the State Department of Education, State Board of Education, Commissioner of Education, change provision relating to application requirements for option students, high school graduation requirements, alternative teacher certification programs, student loan repayment assistance, innovation and improvement grants established by the State Board of Education, the summer food service program, special education expenditures, programs for learners with high ability, behavioral health, points of contact, state lottery funds used for education, behavioral awareness training, college pathway program, harmonized provisions to eliminate an innovation grant program established by the department, and a mental health first aid training program, to repeal original sections and to repeal section 7911-160 revised stats up 2013. 1332 by Senator Duncan is a bill for an act relating to consumer protection, to adopt the Prepaid Card Consumer Protection Act. 1333 by Senator Vargas. It's a bill for an act relating to the Business Innovation Act, change federal award matching grant and funding limitations prescribed and repeal the original sections. 1334 by Senator John Kavanaugh. It's a bill for an act relating to the criminal procedure, change provision relating to the revocation of probation and waiver of probation fees, and repeal the original sections. 1335 by Senator Moser is a bill for an act relating to the Non-Game and Endangered Species Conservation Act. Define terms, change provisions, and provide duties and exemptions for the Non-Game and Endangered Species Conservation Act relating to transportation infrastructure, to harmonize provisions, repeal the original sections. 1336 by Senator DeKay. It's a bill for an act relating to broadband, to remove certain jurisdictions from the Public Service Commission and transfer administration of the Nebraska Broadband Bridge Act to the Nebraska Broadband Office, change and provide powers and duties, define and redefine terms, change matching fund requirements, change application waste courting consideration to create a fund, change how the Nebraska Broadband Bridge Act is construed to harmonize provisions, repeal the original sections. 1337 by Senator Walls is a bill for an act relating to schools, to adopt the School Construction Financing Act. 1338 by Senator Walls, a bill for an act relating to education, to adopt the Good Life Promise Act. 1339 by Senator Brewer, it's a bill for an act relating to schools, to change provision relating to carrying a concealed handgun and possession of a firearm in a school, on school grounds, or school events. Define and redefine terms, provide for public and private schools, provide emergency response mapping data to public safety agencies, provide for grants, provide powers and duties for educational service units, State Department of Education, and State Board of Education, change permitted use of the School Safety and Security Fund, harmonize provisions, and repeal the original sections. 1340 by Senator Cowth, bill for an act related to motor vehicles, change provisions related to motor vehicle homicide, change the enforcement of violation of any interactive or handheld wireless communication device while operating a motor vehicle as prescribed, change provision relating to speed limit violation, change provision relating to persons who are authorized to remove vehicles from highways, provide and change fines and penalties, harmonize provisions, repeal the original sections. 1341 by Senator Wayne, bill for an act relating to hemp, to impose a higher sales and use tax rate on sales of consumable hemp products, provide for the distribution of tax revenue, state intent regarding funding, harmonize provisions, repeal original sections. 1342 by Senator Wayne is a bill for an act related to revenue and taxation, provide a sales and use tax exemption for electricity and natural gas as prescribed, to provide an operative date, repeal the original sections. 1343 by Senator Wayne. It's a bill for an act relating to the Office of Public Counsel, change and eliminate provisions relating to the appointment and reappointment and terms of the Inspector General from Nebraska Child Welfare and the Inspector General of the Nebraska Correctional System, repeal the original sections. 1344 by Senator Wayne, a bill for an act relating to the Nebraska Innovation Hub Act to redefine terms, change provision relating to IHUB application, designation, terminations prescribed, require a report to the legislature, harmonize provision, repeal the original sections. 1345 by Senator Wayne, bill for an act relating to revenue and taxation to impose sales and use taxes on certain services, provide an operative date, repeal the original section, declare an emergency. 1346 by Senator Vargas, a bill for enacting relating to property taxes, provide a property tax exemption for qualified affordable housing developments as prescribed, define and redefine terms, change provision relating to exemption application procedures, harmonize provisions, and repeal the original section. 1347 by Senator Walls, a bill for enacting relating to schools to adopt the Community Schools Act. 1348 by Senator Merman. It's a bill for enacting relating to Tax Equity and Educational Opportunity Support Act to change provision relating to the comparison groups for purposes of calculating base funding under the Act and repeal the original section. 1349, Senator Merman. It's a bill for enacting relating to revenue and taxation to impose sales and use taxes on certain services, to eliminate certain sales and use tax exemptions, harmonize provision, provide an operative date, and repeal the original sections, declare an emergency. 1350 by Senator DeBoer. It's a bill for enacting public health and welfare to define terms within the Child Health Care Facilities Licensure Act to harmonize provisions, repeal the original sections. 1351 by Senator DeBoer. It's a bill for enacting relating to correction, change provision relating to terminology and eliminate obsolete provisions, and to repeal the original sections. 1352 by Senator DeBoer. It's a bill for enacting relating for appropriations to state intent regarding appropriations of federal funds allocated to the state of Nebraska from the Federal Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Act pursuant to the American Rescue Plan of 2021 and to declare an emergency. 1353 by Senator Vargas. It's a bill for enacting relating to insurance, change provision relating to coverage for screening mammography and breast examinations, provide an operative date, repeal the original sections. 1354 by Senator Albright. It's a bill for enacting relating to revenue and taxation to adopt the Advertising Services Tax Act. 1355 by Senator Vargas. It's a bill for enacting relating to the Opioid Prevention and Treatment Act, change provision related to the Nebraska Opioid Recovery Fund, provide for grants to harmonize provisions, repeal the original sections. 1356 by Senator Wayne. It's a bill for enacting relating to the Community Development Assistance Act, change provision relating to program proposals and review powers and duties of the Director of Economic Development, Department of Economic Development, eligibility for and maximum limits on tax credits to eliminate obsolete provisions, harmonize provisions, repeal the original sections. 1357 by Senator McDonald. It's a bill for enacting relating to crimes and offenses, prohibit camping on political subdivision property as prescribed, define terms, harmonize provisions, repeal the original sections. 1358 by Senator McDonald. It's a bill for enacting related to political subdivision to require approval of registered voters to increase salaries of governing bodies as prescribed, provide a duty for the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. 1359 by Senator McDonald. It's a bill for enacting relating to bonds, change provision relating to the issuance of bonds in the city of metropolitan class, and repeal the original sections. 1360 by Senator McDonald. It's a bill for enacting relating to courts to create the Court Security and Service Reimbursement Program. 1361, Senator McDonald, bill for enacting relating to revenue and taxation to adopt the Long-Term Resident Homestead Exemption Act, harmonize provisions, repeal the original sections. 1362 by Senator McDonald. It's a bill for enacting relating to property taxes, change provision relating to the valuation of residential property, provide applicability, and repeal the original sections. 1363 by Senator McDonald. It's a bill for enacting relating to revenue and taxation, change provision relating to the rate and disbursement of the documentary stamp tax, the Military Development and Support Fund, Nebraska Film Office Fund, the Innovation Hub Cash Fund, the Economic Recovery Contingency Fund, harmonized revisions, repeal the original sections. 1364, Senator McDonald. It's a bill for enacting relating to the economic development, change provision of the Site Building Development Act, provide for a transfer of the cash fund, repeal the original section, declare an emergency. 1365, Senator McDonald. Bill for enacting relating to retirement, change provision relating to the pre-retirement planning program, the state personnel system, members of the Public Employee Retirement Board, provide for the hiring of any number of assistant directors and deputies of the Nebraska Public Employees Retirement Systems, and authorize compensation for such employees to be determined by the director. 1366 by Senator John Kavanaugh. It's a bill for enacting relating to real property, change provision relating to the use of eminent domain, repeal the original section. 1367 by Senator John Kavanaugh. It's a bill for enacting relating to revenue and taxation to adopt the property tax, tax circuit breaker act to harmonize provisions and repeal the original sections. 1368, Senator Ibach. It's a bill for enacting relating to fertilizer to adopt the Nitrogen Reduction Incentive Act. 1369 by Senator John Kavanaugh. It's a bill for enacting relating to renewable energy, defined terms provide for an interconnection between a local distribution system and an agricultural self-generation facility as prescribed. 1370 by Senator Bostelman. It's a bill for enacting relating to public power, defined terms to require an electric supplier to replace the retired dispatchable electric generation facility as prescribed. 1371, Senator Vargas. It's a bill for enacting relating to schools, provide and change graduation requirements, change duties relating to academic content standards, repeal the original sections. 1372 by Senator Brand. It's a bill for enacting relating to revenue and taxation, change provision relating to individual and corporate income tax rates and property tax credits, repeal the original sections. 1373 by Senator Blood. It's a bill for enacting relating to public health and welfare, to adopt the dietitian licensure compact, change provision relating to criminal background checks under the Uniform Credentialing Act to harmonize provisions, repeal the original sections. 1374 by Senator Linehan. It's a bill for enacting relating to economic development, to adopt the Good Life District Economic Development Act, change related to redistrict funds and limitations, refine terms under the Community Development Law, change the Good Life Transformation Project Act as prescribed, repeal the original sections, declare an emergency. LB 1375 by Senator Lowe at the request of the governor. It's a bill for enacting relating to county government, to change powers and duties of the county planning commission, change provision related to granting, denying, applying for a conditional use permit or special exception as prescribed. 1376 by Senator Reapy. It's a bill for enacting relating to appropriations to appropriate funds to the Department of Health and Human Services. 1377 by Senator Walls at the request of the governor. It's a bill for enacting relating to education, provide and change requirements relating to certain training as prescribed, to harmonize provisions, repeal the original sections. 1378 by Senator Dover. It's a bill for enacting relating to public funds, state legislative intent to appropriate funds to the Department of Administrative Services, change provision of the Nebraska Public Safety Communication System Revolving Fund, change provision, provide for transfer from the 911 Service System Fund, eliminate obsolete provisions, harmonize provisions, repeal the original sections. 1379 by Senator Dover. It's a bill for enacting relating to revenue and taxation to create the Housing Aid Fund, change related to the Housing Advisory Committee and the Nebraska Affordable Housing Act, and the rate and disbursement of the Documentary Stamp Act, provide an operative date to repeal the original sections. 1380 by Senator Dover. It's a bill for enacting relating to appropriations to provide for a transfer from the cash reserve fund, state intent to appropriate funds to the administrative services to Wyuka Cemetery, and declare an emergency. 1381, Senator Ben Hinson. It's a bill for enacting the Federal Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Act to provide work requirements as prescribed, provide an operative date, repeal original sections. 1382 by Senator Hansen. It's a bill for enacting relating to ballot initiatives. Provide a restriction relating to the payment of petition circulators, prohibit certain contributions to a ballot question committee, harmonize provision, provide an operative date, repeal the original sections. New resolutions, LR 282, offered by Senator Lippincott, would constitute an application according to Article 5 of the Constitution of the State of Nebraska regarding the same subject matters applications to call a convention for the limitation on the number of terms. 283 CA, offered by Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, is a proposed constitutional amendment to create the Legislative Salary Commission and change provision relating to legislative salaries. 284, offered by Senator DeBoer, is a proposed constitutional amendment to create within the legislature the Office of Public Counsel. 285 CA, offered by Senator McDonald, is a proposed constitutional amendment authorizing the legislature to provide a different method of taxing residential property. 286 CA by Senator Von Gillern is a proposed constitutional amendment to prohibit the state of Nebraska and its retirement system from contracting and investing in companies that active business offers any foreign terrorist organization or state sponsor of terrorism. An announcement that the Executive Board has chosen Legislative Bill 1321 as a committee priority bill.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Recognize Senator Aguilar for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a reminder that the bill introduction deadline is this afternoon upon adjournment. My office has received word from the Reviser of Statutes office that all three-part requests have been received and are currently en route to your office. If your office has not yet received a three-part for a bill, or if you have not yet requested a three-part for a bill that you would like to introduce, please contact the Reviser of Statutes office ASAP. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Aguilar. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, announcement, reference will meet upon recess in room 21-2 for purposes of referring bills. Finally, priority motion, Senator Albright would move to recess until 1:30 p.m.
Members, you've heard the motion to recess until 1:30. All of those in favor say aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned till 1:30, recess till 1:30.
We should have known better with one of the last days.